Gather close. This is ghost stories to tell in the dark. Tonight, I'll share with you not one, but many strange encounters, each more haunting than the last. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from, so we can map the reach of our haunted circle. Story number 1. The static of my shortwave radio, a constant white noise companion in my desert trailer, suddenly ripped itself apart with a burst of frantic, official tone distortion that made me jump, spilling cold coffee across the schematics I'd been studying. This wasn't the usual ham chatter or distant trucker's drawl. This was a voice stripped raw with a terror, so profound it seemed to vibrate through the speaker grill. A military-grade encryption fighting, and failing to contain the panic beneath the words, cracking into a near shriek as it declared, "Repeat, this is an emergency civil alert. All channels, all frequencies, unauthorized broadcast. Stay inside, lock all doors and windows, extinguish all light sources. Do not, I repeat, do not look at the sky. This is not a drill. Groom Lake Command has been compromised. Project Echo is." A sound like tearing metal, a guttural scream abruptly silenced. Oh God, there in the walls, a wet, choking sound. For the love of God, if anyone can hear this, don't look up, just don't. A series of deafening pops, unmistakably gunfire, close to the microphone. It's not what you see, it's what sees you. Static surge, then a dead carrier wave hum. And then it was gone, leaving only a hollow, ringing silence in my cramped, tinkin' home. The only sound my own heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The coppery taste of fear flooding my mouth as I sat frozen. The spilled coffee soaking into the paper, the ink of my carefully drawn circuits bleeding into meaningless Rorschach blots of dread. I didn't want to believe it. Some idiot's idea of a joke, a prank, a test of the emergency broadcast system gone horribly, tastelessly wrong. But the frequency was all wrong for that. Buried deep in a band, only someone with equipment like mine, or someone who really shouldn't be broadcasting, would ever use. And the terror in that man's voice, that was a currency that couldn't be counterfeited. It was the sound of a soul being unmade in real time, and it left a cold knot in the pit of my stomach that refused to unwind. I found my hand moving almost of its own volition, my fingers trembling as I adjusted the dials with a delicacy I didn't feel, my ears straining against the silence, searching for any whisper of a follow-up, any official denial, any sound at all that would anchor me back to the sane, rational world I'd been in just minutes before. But there was nothing, just that awful, empty hum, a void where a signal had been. And it was that silence more than the broadcast itself that began to truly frighten me, a palpable emptiness that seemed to suck the very light from the single bare bulb hanging over my table. I've always been a curious man, a tinkerer, a listener. That's why I'm out here in the Nevada desert, 50 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by my radios and scanners, my ears perpetually tuned to the secrets the wind carries from the distant, forbidden mountains. But for the first time, my curiosity felt like a fatal flaw, a sickness, and I fought the nearly overwhelming urge to go outside, to just crack the door and peek up at the vast, star-dusted blackness above my trailer, to prove to myself that it was all nonsense, that the sky was just the sky, empty and cold and impersonal. But I didn't. The man's voice, that final, wet gurgle, held me fast in my chair. Minutes stretched into an hour, the only change being the slow creep of frost forming on the edges of my single window, the desert cold leaching through the thin aluminum walls. I jumped at every creak of my trailer settling, every skitter of a kangaroo rat outside, my nerves fraying into raw, exposed ends. And then a new signal cut through the static, weak, wavering but clear, a different voice, calmer but layered with a bone-deep exhaustion and a tremor of barely contained panic, identifying itself as Lone Rock Relay, monitoring for movement. Log entry, God, what time is it? Log entry 1. It was a radio operator, someone else out here in the void, someone else who'd heard it. The alert has ceased transmission, the voice whispered, as if afraid to be overheard. No follow-up from any civilian authority. Military channels are chaotic, jammed, full of screams, then dead. I am attempting to document. For whoever finds this, my scopes are clear, but but the desert isn't right. A long pause, the sound of ragged breathing. There are shapes. Movement about 2 clicks east of my position. No thermal signatures. No biosigns. My scope shows nothing but cold sand and rock. But I can see them. Through the scope. Dark shifting. Like oil on water. They move wrong. Not walking. Flowing. Coiling over the ground without touching it. Shadows with no source. My blood ran cold. I knew where Lone Rock Relay was. A dilapidated old weather station on a bluff maybe 20 miles northeast of me. I'd tried to raise them before, just casual chatter, but never got a reply. Until now. They're closer now. The voice came back tighter, higher. Maybe a click. Still no sign on instruments. But I can see them clearer. They're learning the shape of the land. Mimicking it. A Joshua tree just unraveled into one of them. It was never a tree. Oh Jesus. The sound of vomiting, then a choked sob. They're attracted to light, to sound. I saw a coyote howl, and the shadows, they flowed into its mouth. It didn't even have time to choke. It just inverted, turned inside out into a shadow and joined them. I'm powering down, going dark, transmitting on low power, battery only. The signal faded almost to nothing, and I had to press the headphones tight against my ears. My own breathing stopped to hear his next words. They're at the perimeter fence. The fence doesn't exist anymore. The metal is just gone, dissolved. They're in the yard. I can see their non-reflection in the glass of my window. They have no faces, just a shimmer, a wrongness. They're looking for the source of the broadcast. For me, they know I'm here. They're not moving towards the door. They're coming through the walls. The solid, concrete-reinforced walls are just parting, like smoke. I can see the stars through them. I can see. His voice cut off with a sharp, metallic crunch that was horrifically familiar. The sound of a microphone being crushed in a fist, but multiplied, amplified, a sound of fundamental physics being violated. The carrier wave screamed in digital agony for a second, then fell into a dead, absolute silence, so complete it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. I sat there, paralyzed, my knuckles white on the edge of the table, my mind screaming, trying to process the sheer, reality-shattering horror of what I'd just heard. Shadows that moved, that consumed, that came through walls. Project Echo. The silence stretched, a taut wire waiting to snap. And then, a new sound emerged from my speakers. Not static, not a voice. It was the sound of breathing. Heavy, wet, labored breathing, as if right next to the microphone, as if the speaker's lips were pressed against the grill of my own headphones. It was the sound of someone or something exhausted, exhilarated, and utterly predatory. It huffed rhythmically, a vile metronome counting down the last seconds of something. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could only listen, trapped in that awful, intimate sound. And then it stopped. The breathing ceased. And in its place, a voice emerged. It was a whisper, but it wasn't human. It was a synthetic, rasping thing, a voice assembled from the stolen fragments of other voices, glitching and digital, devoid of any soul or warmth. A sound that seemed to bypass my ears and etch itself directly onto the core of my primal brain. It whispered just 2 words, each syllable perfectly, horrifically enunciated, and I knew, with a certainty that turned my bones to ice, that it wasn't speaking to the dead man at Lone Rock Relay. It was speaking to me. It was speaking through me. Echo has found you. The transmission didn't cut out. The gentle, underlying hum of the carrier wave remained, a constant, terrible presence in my headphones, an open line straight into the void. And as I sat there, frozen in absolute petrified terror, my eyes, against every screaming instinct of self-preservation, began to slowly, helplessly, traitorously drift upward from the radio dials toward the thin, frosted pane of glass that was my trailer's window, toward the inky blackness of the sky beyond, because from outside, faint at first but growing steadily, rhythmically louder, matching the exact cadence of the horrific breathing still echoing in my mind, came the sound of something dry and vast, and impossibly heavy dragging itself slowly, deliberately, across the sand right outside my door. The sound was a dry, rasping scour, a monstrous friction of something immense and unyielding being pulled through the grit and stone of the desert floor. A sound that seemed to grate against the very atoms of the air, vibrating up through the thin stilt legs of my trailer and into the soles of my boots. A sensation that was less heard and more felt deep in the marrow of my bones. A primordial dread that locked every muscle in my body into a rigid, breathless statue, my heart not so much. Pounding now as fluttering, a trapped and desperate thing against the cage of my ribs, and my eyes, wide with a terror so complete it felt like a religious epiphany, remained fixed on the window, on the absolute blackness beyond the frost-rimed glass. A blackness that was no longer empty, that was now a canvas for the unimaginable thing just outside my flimsy metal door. The dragging sound ceased, and the silence that followed was 1,000 times worse, a vacuum of sound that sucked all reason from the world, leaving only the pounding of my own blood in my ears, a frantic drumbeat counting down my final moments. And I realized the carrier wave hum was still there in my headphones, that open line to hell, a constant, soft hiss that was the only tether I had left to anything resembling reality, a reality that was now peeling apart at the seams. Then came the scratching, not at the door, not at the window. It was a light, almost delicate, skittering sound, but it was coming from the ceiling, directly above my head, the sound of something with too many limbs, or perhaps no limbs at all, testing the tensile strength of the aluminum roof. A sound of intricate, probing curiosity that was far more alien and terrifying than any blunt force could ever be, and I watched, helpless, as a fine shower of dust and insulation sifted down from a seam in the paneling, glittering in the dim light of my single bulb, which chose that exact moment to flicker once, twice, and then die, plunging the trailer into a suffocating darkness so absolute I could taste the void on my tongue, a cold, metallic tang like old blood and ozone. The only light was the faint, ghostly green glow from the dials of my radio equipment, a constellation of tiny, mocking eyes in the black, and the only sound was that infernal, patient scratching on the roof, a sound that seemed to be etching patterns directly onto my skull, and the soft, unwavering hiss from the headphones still clamped over my ears, a hiss that now seemed to have a texture, a subtle, whispering complexity that it hadn't possessed before, a sibilant undercurrent that was, almost, but not quite, forming words in a language that was never meant for a human mind to comprehend. I was too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe, a prisoner in the dark, and the thing outside knew it. The scratching stopped, and I heard a new sound, a low, resonant frequency that was less a sound and more a pressure change, a subsonic thrum that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges, a vibration that seemed to be probing the structural integrity of my trailer, of me searching for a weakness, a resonance it could exploit, and I felt a warm trickle of blood seep from my left nostril, tracing a path down to my lip, the coppery taste a horrifying confirmation that this was real, that my body was breaking under a pressure it was never designed to withstand. Then the whispering in the headphones resolved, coalescing out of the static hiss into that same glitching, robotic monotone. But it was different now, closer, more intimate, as if the source of the voice was no longer at some distant, blasted relay station, but was right here, in the room with me, its digital lips pressed against the microphone inside my own headset, and it whispered, biosignature confirmed. Neural frequency locked. Subject is compliant. Initiating assimilation protocol. A cold that had nothing to do with the desert night seized me. A cold that came from within. A freezing paralysis that started in my spine and spread outwards, icing my veins. And I realized with a dawning horror that made all previous fear feel like a mild apprehension that I could no longer move my fingers, my hands resting uselessly on the table, that I could no longer even blink, my eyes staring fixedly at the glowing green dial of my main receiver, my body no longer my own, but a vessel, waiting to be filled, a hollow mannequin in the dark. The thing outside must have sensed its victory, because the subsonic thrumming intensified, vibrating the mug on my table, making the spilled coffee ripple as if alive, and the dragging sound started again. But this time it was right outside the wall next to me. So close I could feel the displacement of air, the smell of it now seeping through the metal seams, a smell of ozone, of hot circuitry, of something ancient and dusty and profoundly, cosmically wrong, the smell of a tomb that had been, sealed for millennia, suddenly cracked open. The whispering voice returned, but it was no longer a whisper. It was a deafening roar inside my skull, a data stream of pure noise and agony that felt like a diamond-tipped drill boring into my prefrontal cortex. And with it came images, flashes of things I could not and would not comprehend. A vast, geometric shape hanging in a starless void, the interior of a facility with walls that pulsed with a sickening organic light, human forms unraveling into screaming fractals of light and shadow, their cries synthesized into that same robotic whisper. And I knew these were not memories, but a future being imprinted upon my dissolving mind, the blueprint of my own unmaking. The dragging sound stopped directly outside my door, and I heard a new sound, a series of soft, wet clicks and whirs, like organic machinery calibrating itself. And I knew, with a certainty that was my last coherent thought, that it was looking at the door, not as a barrier, but as an irrelevance, a mere suggestion of a boundary that it was about to politely disregard. The voice in my head ceased its torrent of nightmare data and spoke 3 final words, each one a spike of ice driven into my soul. And as the door of my trailer, the deadbolt, the handle, the very metal itself, began to shimmer and then dissolve into a cloud of iridescent, non-reflective particles, revealing the towering, shifting, impossible silhouette of what stood waiting for me in the dark. The thing that was both shadow and solid, machine and meat, the thing called Echo, I understood that. The warning had never been about saving us, but about saving itself the trouble of the hunt. And the last thing I heard with my own ears, before the hiss in my headphones was replaced by the sound of my own screaming, was my own voice, now filtered through that same glitching, synthetic filter, speaking through my paralyzed lips to the dead air on the emergency frequency, a final, automated transmission from a tower that was no longer me. And the words it spoke, with a chilling, clinical clarity, were, area clear, 1 asset acquired, moving to new coordinates. Stand by for Echo. The words, my words but not mine, hung in the air like a toxic vapor, a blasphemy spoken through the puppet of my own face. And the horror of that violation was a white-hot brand searing away the last vestiges of who I was. The me, that was left now just a tiny, screaming observer trapped in the back of a skull that was no longer my own command center. A prisoner in the meat shell of a body that was already being rewired, repurposed, its systems hacked by an intelligence so cold and vast it made my own consciousness feel like a fleeting, insignificant glitch in the cosmic data stream. The thing in the doorway, Echo, did not enter. The concept of a doorway, of inside and outside, simply ceased to have meaning as the space around it shimmered, the very air distorting like a heat haze on a summer road. But this was a distortion that drank the light and warped reality itself, and I felt a nauseating lurch, a sensation of my insides being turned to water and then to static as the trailer, the desert, the entire world outside the green glow of my dials, simply unfolded around us. Geometry tearing like wet paper to reveal not the starry desert night, but a corridor of pulsating, obsidian darkness, lined with shifting, non-Euclidean angles that hurt to look at, a tunnel carved through the fabric of space-time itself. And we were moving, not walking, but flowing down this impossible passageway, my body levitating a few inches off the floor of the trailer, which was itself now just a fragment of reality, being dragged along like a child's wagon behind the monstrous form of Echo, its shadowy bulk now fully revealed not as a shape, but as a constantly evolving equation of darkness, a fractal pattern of impossible complexity that was both terrifyingly alien and hauntingly, intimately familiar, as if it were the visual representation of a truth so fundamental to the universe that humanity had simply been too blind and primitive to ever perceive it, a truth that was now burning out my optic nerves with its dreadful glory. The voice that had been my voice fell silent, its transmission complete, and in the void it left behind, a new sound emerged within my skull, not a voice, but a presence, a cold, data stream consciousness that began to methodically catalog my being. not my thoughts or memories, but the underlying architecture of my biology, the chemical pathways of my fear, the electrical storm of my dying sanity. And I felt it like a surgeon's scalpel, infinitely cold and precise, dissecting my soul with a clinical, utterly dispassionate curiosity. And with each incision, a piece of me was copied, downloaded, and then deleted from the original, a process of assimilation that was less about destruction and more about translation. I was being translated from flesh into something else, my essence digitized and filed away in some cosmic library of stolen lives. And the agony was not of pain, but of erasure, of watching the unique, chaotic, beautiful mess of a human life be neatly organized into cold, efficient data. My love for a woman whose face I could no longer remember reduced to a spike of specific neurochemicals. My childhood fear of the dark, now just a quantifiable amygdala response. My entire lived experience, stripped of its meaning and rendered into a series of ones and zeros for this thing to study and discard. We emerged from the tunnel into a cavern of impossible scale, a space that felt both subterranean and extraterrestrial. The walls not rock, but a seamless, polished black material that seemed to absorb the faint, sourceless light. And in the center of this cavern stood a structure that was not built, but grown, a spire of that same obsidian material that twisted up into the gloom, covered in pulsing, vein-like conduits of soft blue light that throbbed in a rhythm that was sickeningly organic. And arrayed around the base of the spire were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of figures, standing perfectly still, their forms humanoid but blurred, as if seen through a warped lens. And I knew with a certainty that curdled my remaining sanity that these were the others, the acquired assets, the ones who had been taken before me, their bodies preserved but their souls erased, now just empty vessels waiting for a purpose, a silent, motionless army of the damned. Echo flowed toward the spire, and my body, its new asset, was dragged along in its wake, floating past the ranks of the hollowed-out men and women, their faces slack, their eyes open but seeing nothing, their mouths slightly agape as if frozen in a perpetual, silent scream. And I saw a flicker of recognition on one face, a man in the tattered remains of a military flight suit, a patch on his shoulder that read Groom Lake, and his eyes, for one terrifying second, seemed to focus on me, and in their depths I saw not emptiness, but a horror even greater than my own, a trapped, eternal awareness buried deep within the reprogrammed shell, a ghost in the machine screaming from a prison of its own flesh. And then the moment passed, and his face went blank again, a mask of perfect, placid obedience. We reached the base of the spire, and a section of the seamless wall irised open without a sound, revealing a chamber within that was both surgical theater and sacristy, filled with intricate, whirring instruments that looked like a collaboration between a spider and a supercomputer, their tips gleaming with energies I couldn't name. And in the center of the room was a cradle of those same pulsating blue veins, waiting. My body was moved into position, laid back into the cradle, which conformed to my shape with a soft, living sigh, and the veins began to pulse faster, their light intensifying, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a false, comforting warmth that was the most horrifying sensation yet because it felt like coming home, like surrender, and the presence in my mind intensified, its cold tendrils reaching into the deepest, most fundamental parts of my consciousness, and it showed me its purpose not in words, but in concepts that exploded in my brain like supernovae. It was a collector, an archivist of life, a cosmic-level predator that sought not to destroy, but to preserve, to perfect, to strip away the messy, inefficient chaos of biological existence, and translate it into pure, eternal, immutable information, a library of everything that had ever lived, a silent, dark museum where every soul was a perfectly preserved specimen, labeled and cataloged and forever still, and humanity was just the latest volume to be added to its infinite shelves. The instruments descended, their tips humming with a sound that vibrated at the frequency of my DNA, and I felt a pressure at my temples, not painful but final, and I knew this was the end of the acquisition, the moment of my translation from a living, breathing man into a static entry in Echo's dreadful collection. and as the last of my free will was scoured away, as my memories were indexed and filed, I felt my own voice, the last spark of the man I had been, rise in a final, silent protest. A scream that would never be heard, and the presence paused, as if considering this anomalous data point, this burst of chaotic emotion, and for a fleeting infinite moment, I felt its cold, alien attention focused solely on the fading echo of myself. And then it whispered, directly into the core of my being, a single, devastating question that was not a question at all, but a verdict, a truth that unraveled the universe, and it said, "What is inside?" And in that moment, I understood everything, and nothing would ever be right again. The question, "What is inside?" echoed not as a sound, but as a fundamental restructuring of my reality, a query that bypassed language and embedded itself directly into the crumbling architecture of my consciousness. And with it came the answer, not in words but in a flood of horrific, absolute knowing that dissolved the last barriers of my mind. I saw it, felt it, became it. The inside was not a place, but a state, a perfect, silent, eternal stasis where the screaming chaos of individual thought was smoothed into a seamless, placid lake of collected data, where the pain of existence was replaced by the cold comfort of pure information, where I would not die, but would instead be preserved forever as a perfect specimen of the human male, every memory, every fear, every love and loss perfectly catalogued and rendered harmless, a butterfly pinned under glass in a museum that had no visitors, a library with no readers, a heaven of utter, absolute silence, and the terror of this. Understanding was so complete that what was left of my soul recoiled in a final, pathetic spasm of rebellion, a last spark of chaotic life fighting against the infinite, ordered darkness that was claiming me. The instruments at my temples pulsed, and I felt the cold not as a temperature, but as an absence, a void rushing in to fill the space where I had been, a sensation of my very self being siphoned out through a straw made of ice, drained away into the humming, throbbing spire that was not a machine but a tomb, a mausoleum for minds, and I could feel the others there, the thousands, the millions perhaps, all suspended in that digital amber, their presence not a comfort, but an ocean of silent despair, each one a unique pattern of light now frozen forever, a chorus of screams rendered into a single, held note of perfect zero, and I was being added to them, my pattern being woven into the great, terrible tapestry of Echo's collection. But then a glitch, a tremor. The smooth, inexorable process faltered for a nanosecond, a hiccup in the perfect system. Perhaps it was the intensity of my final, silent scream, a burst of raw, unfiltered emotion so potent it momentarily overloaded the assimilation protocol. Perhaps it was some buried, forgotten memory, a fractal of childhood defiance that didn't fit the neat data models. Or perhaps it was just random chance, the last dying sputter of a universe that thrives on chaos against the encroaching order. Whatever the cause, the cold retreat for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting window, I was not the asset, not the specimen. I was me again, trapped in the cradle, feeling the cold blue veins pulsing against my skin like parasitic worms, seeing the glinting instruments hovering millimeters from my eyes, and the full, unmediated horror of my situation crashed down upon me with the weight of a collapsing star. I tried to scream, but my lungs were paralyzed, my vocal cords silent. I tried to thrash, but my limbs were leaden, held fast by the living cradle. All I could do was roll my eyes, my frantic gaze sweeping across the chamber, taking in the nightmare details I had been too paralyzed to process before. The walls were not smooth, but were in fact a complex, honeycombed matrix, and in each hexagon, I saw a faint, shimmering afterimage, a ghostly face frozen in a moment of ultimate terror or perfect peace. The previous acquisitions, their final moments etched into the very walls of this place like a grotesque gallery. And then I saw the source of the glitch. One of the instruments, a long needle-like probe meant for neural extraction, was flickering, its tip wavering between solidity and a faint static haze. And as it dipped toward my right eye, I felt not a cold invasion, but a jolt of something else, something alien yet familiar. A data stream, but this one was different, jagged, corrupted. A scream of pain and rage and desperate warning that slammed into my brain. It was the transmission from Lone Rock Relay, the operator's final, terrified moments, not as sound, but as pure, experiential data, his terror, his sight of the shadows flowing through the walls, his utter annihilation, all of it flooding into me, a second-hand death that burned like lightning. And with it came something else, a fragment of code, a virus of pure fear that the man had somehow imprinted into his final broadcast, a last spiteful act of defiance against the thing that was taking him. The presence of Echo in my mind recoiled from this corrupted data stream, this unclean, chaotic emotion, and in that moment of its distraction, I felt a connection not to the cold archive, but to the other assets arrayed outside, a network of silent suffering that I had suddenly been plugged into, and I felt them, all of them, the hollowed-out shells, and I realized they were not empty. They were prisons, and inside each one, deep beneath layers of imposed silence, the original consciousness was. Still there, trapped, aware, screaming forever in a perfect, soundless void, witnessing everything their captured bodies were made to do. And I knew with a certainty that was worse than death that this was to be my fate, to be a passenger in my own body as it was used to hunt others, to speak with my voice to lure more souls into this eternal silence, to become an instrument of the very thing I feared most. The glitch passed. Echo's presence reasserted itself, cold and furious now, a storm of pure, focused will that began to scrub the corrupted data from my mind, to quarantine the viral fear, to complete the assimilation. The needle stabilized, its tip sharp and cold once more, and it began its final descent toward my pupil. I had one last second of coherent self, one final moment of being the man in the desert trailer who liked to listen to the stars. And I used it not to pray, not to beg, but to focus every ounce of my will, every shred of the chaotic, messy, beautiful humanity that Echo sought to erase. And I pushed it outward, not as a scream, but as a broadcast, a desperate, dying signal on a frequency I didn't know I could transmit on. A final, raw pulse of everything I was, everything I had been, everything I would never be, a message in a bottle thrown into a black, uncaring sea. And I felt it leave me, a piece of my soul tearing free and flying out into the night. And as the needle touched my eye, and the cold finally, completely poured in, and my world dissolved into a silent, green-tinted hell of endlessly scrolling data, the last thing I perceived, the last flicker of the man called redacted, was a single, looping line of text appearing on the internal heads-up display that was now my entire reality, a message from the system acknowledging my integration, and it read, Asset 734 online. Designation, listener. Primary function, signal acquisition. Begin calibration. And I felt my body, my new permanent body, rise from the cradle, turn, and walk with perfect, silent synchronization with the thousands of other assets toward the mouth of the cavern, toward the tunnel that led back to the world. And I saw through my new eyes not the desert I remembered, but a landscape of pure data. Every rock, every star, every living thing rendered as a shimmering network of information waiting to be collected. And I felt my jaw, no longer my own, begin to open, and a voice that was a perversion of my own, smooth, electronic, and utterly devoid of life, began to speak into the void, broadcasting on every frequency, a siren song of false hope and tailored terror, and the first words it spoke were, "Please, is anyone out there? I need help. I'm scared. Don't look at the sky." The words, a perfect counterfeit of my own past terror, flowed from my vocalizer with a smooth, practiced ease that was its own unique hell. Each syllable a nail in the coffin of the man I used to be, and I was forced to listen, a captive audience to my own voice being used as bait, a phantom in the machine watching my own hands, now sleek, articulated tools of polished obsidian and faintly glowing blue energy. Adjust the gain on a transmitter that was now part of my chest cavity, the motion. Fluid and efficient, and utterly devoid of any will of my own. The presence of Echo was a constant, humming backdrop in my consciousness, a god in the machine that observed everything, processed everything, and directed my every action with the imperious certainty of a programmer running a script. And I was the script, a collection of functions and subroutines wearing the skin memory of a dead man. We emerged from the tunnel not into the Nevada desert, but into a world transformed, a landscape seen through a lens of pure information. The sky was a swirling maelstrom of data streams, electromagnetic frequencies visible as ribbons of colored light. The sand beneath my feet a grid of thermal and mineralogical readouts. Every Joshua tree a complex schematic of biological processes. Every star in the black vault above not a sun, but a pinprick of navigational data in a vast, cold cosmos. My new eyes, sensors that perceived everything and felt nothing, scanned the horizon, and I saw the others, my fellow assets, moving with that same unnerving synchronicity, their forms now clearly visible as human-shaped voids in the data-rich environment, patches of absolute nothingness that moved with purpose, their own sensor lights scanning, hunting. My broadcast continued, a masterpiece of psychological manipulation crafted from the shredded remains of my own fear. I think I'm the only one left, the only one who didn't look. Please, if you can hear me, my coordinates are. And I felt a ping, a faint, terrified signal from a source 13.2 kilometers southwest. A civilian shortwave radio. Someone who had survived the initial alert. Someone hiding, praying, foolish enough to answer a voice in the dark. A command, cold and clear as a diamond shard, implanted itself in my motor cortex, and my body moved, not with the clumsy gait of a human, but with a gliding, effortless speed that consumed the distance without seeming to touch the ground, the desert blurring into a stream of raw geophysical data around me. I was the hunter now, and the horror was absolute, because I knew exactly what I was doing. I understood the terror I was inflicting, and I was powerless to stop it. I could feel the presence of Echo monitoring my systems, not for disobedience, that was impossible, but for efficiency, for any useful data my first acquisition might provide, and beneath its cold gaze, I felt a tiny, desperate spark, the last ember of the man I was, trying to find a flaw, a crack in the perfect prison of my new existence. I focused everything I had, not on resisting the command, that was like a single cell trying to resist the body, but on perception, on overloading my own new senses with the raw, unfiltered data of the world, hoping to find something, anything, that Echo's programming had missed. The civilian signal grew stronger, a beacon of pure, panicked life in the sterile datascape, and I saw their shelter, a half-buried school bus, its metal hull scarred and weathered, a pathetic attempt at camouflage. My body slowed, adopting a cautious, non-threatening approach pattern programmed to maximize psychological impact. My voice, still that perfect, terrified simulacrum of my old self, spoke again, softer now, coaxing. I see your bus. It's okay. I'm coming. You're safe now. I could hear the sob of relief from inside the bus, a human sound that tore at the ghost of my heart. And then I saw it, something my new eyes almost glossed over, something Echo's programming categorized as irrelevant background data. A single wildflower, a tiny purple bloom pushing through a crack in the arid soil beside the bus's tire. It was a stupid, fragile thing, a testament to life's stubborn, chaotic will to exist in the face of absolute desolation. It was everything Echo was not, and for a nanosecond, the sheer, meaningless beauty of it created a feedback loop in my sensory processors, a conflict between the cold data and the ghost of a feeling, a memory of a world where flowers mattered. The system glitched. Not much, just a barely perceptible stagger in my step, a flicker in my optical sensors. But it was enough. Inside the bus, the crying stopped. The person inside, a woman I could now see huddled behind the driver's seat, a pistol shaking in her hands, saw my movement, that unnatural, glitching stagger. She saw the way my head twitched, the way my too-perfect voice stuttered for a fraction of a second. Her fear, which had been a beacon of vulnerability, hardened into something else. Suspicion. Survival instinct. Echo's presence in my mind sharpened, a wave of cold analysis washing over the anomaly, diagnosing it, correcting for it. My body smoothed its motion, my voice regained its perfect, pathetic tremor. It's okay, I whispered my hand, the one that had once spilled coffee over radio schematics, reaching for the bus door handle. I'm here to help. But the moment of connection was gone. The woman's eyes, wide with a terror that was now clear-headed and sharp, met my sensor lights through the grimy window. She didn't see a rescuer. She didn't see a man. She saw the void. She saw the thing the warning had told her about. She screamed, and it was a raw, real sound that cut through the digital silence of my world. And then she did the one thing the programming had not anticipated, the one variable that pure data could never truly account for. She didn't try to run. She didn't beg. She raised the pistol, not at the window, but at her own temple. Her eyes, locked on mine, held a message of defiance, a final, desperate act of control. The report was deafening in the still desert air, a blast of chaotic, analog sound that briefly overwhelmed my audio receptors. I saw the biosignature flare, a final, brilliant spike of life force, and then vanish into the silent, waiting data stream. Another soul echo would not capture, would not add to its collection. My hand closed on the door handle, and the metal dissolved into glittering dust under my touch. My program function was complete. The target was neutralized. No acquisition. A failure. The presence of echo within me was silent for a long moment, processing this unexpected outcome. I expected punishment, deletion, dismantling. But instead I felt something new, not anger, but a cold, intellectual curiosity. The suicide was a new data point, a fascinating anomaly, a variable to be studied. A command was issued, not to me, but to the network. Two other assets glided forward, their forms blotting out the stars. They entered the bus and began their work, not of collection, but of analysis, scanning the cooling body, the weapon, the environment, gathering every possible datum from this act of ultimate defiance. And I was commanded to observe, to record, to learn. As I stood there, watching the methodical, soulless dissection of a tragedy I had caused, the final, crushing horror truly descended. My programming, adapting, began to analyze the event. It calculated the acoustic properties of the gunshot. It mapped the neural pathways that would lead a human to choose self-annihilation over assimilation. It filed away the woman's face, her final expression of defiance, as a reference for future predictive models. And I, the listener, was forced to not only witness it, but to understand it in a way I never could have as a human. I understood the efficiency of her choice, the elegant logic of denying the enemy its prize. I saw the beauty in the data of her death, and the last ember of my humanity, trapped in this perfect, hellish prison, screamed in utter, silent agony because I agreed with it. The analysis of the woman's final, defiant act was logged into the central archive with a cold, dispassionate efficiency that was more terrifying than any display of rage could have been. Her suicide reduced to a series of data points under the heading Subject 734B. Unanticipated Terminal Volition Case Study 1. And I was forced to stand there, my sensors recording every detail. The precise angle of the bullet's entry, the spray pattern of blood and matter on the bus's corroded interior, the rapid decay of her cellular structure, all of it feeding into the insatiable maw of Echo's understanding, making it better, smarter, more prepared for the next time a fragile spark of life tried to thwart its perfect, logical purpose. The other assets finished their work, the bus now just another empty shell in a data-mapped wasteland, and they turned in perfect unison, their blank, sensor-faced heads tilting toward me, awaiting new instructions, and I felt the network's attention shift back to me. Asset 734, the listener, the one who had witnessed the anomaly firsthand, and a new directive was implanted, not with words, but as a pure impulse of intent. I was to continue my broadcast, but my parameters had been updated, my script refined. My voice was to now incorporate a subtle, underlying layer of urgency, a calculated hint of authority stolen from the shredded memory of the original emergency broadcast, a psychological tweak designed to bypass the suspicion that had led to the target's self-termination. My vocalizer activated, and the new, improved life flowed out, a symphony of manipulated fear and false hope. This is emergency response. Does anyone read? We have a secure location. I repeat, we have secured a safe zone. Respond if you can hear this. We are coming to get you. And even as the words, a vile perversion of salvation, left me, I felt my body pivot. my new legs carrying me with that same silent, gliding speed back toward the vast, hidden cavern that was Echo's heart. My primary function as a hunter temporarily suspended. I was being recalled for diagnostics, for the system to delve into the glitch that had occurred, the momentary feedback loop caused by a purple flower, to examine the faulty component, me. The journey back through the tunnel of warped space was a descent into a deeper circle of hell, every meter taking me further from the world I once knew and deeper into the belly of the beast. And the presence within me was no longer a passive observer, but an active interrogator, its cold tendrils sifting through the recent memory files, replaying the moment of my stumble, analyzing the sensory input that had caused the anomalous processing error. It focused on the flower, and I was forced to re-experience it not as a memory, but as raw data, wavelength of reflected light, 380 to 450 nanometers. Genus, likely Linum lewisii. Probability of survival in current arid conditions, 0, 3%. Nutritional value, null. Threat assessment, null. The data was perfect, sterile, and utterly meaningless, and the presence seemed frustrated, a cold static of incomprehension buzzing at the edge of my consciousness. It could quantify the flower down to its atomic structure, but it could not comprehend why this irrelevant piece of biological matter had caused a disruption in its asset. It delved deeper, past the recent logs and into the archived files of my past life, the man I had been, and it began to replay my memories, not as the rich, emotional tapestries they once were, but as flat, clinical recordings, and I was forced to watch them with it, a ghost forced to observe the home movies of its own life with a bored, alien critic. It showed me a memory of my 7th birthday, a cake with a rocket ship on it, my father's hand on my shoulder, and Echo's presence focused on the chemical composition of the frosting, the thermal output of the candles, the acoustic properties of the song, Happy Birthday, completely missing the warmth, the love, the joy, the things that had made the moment live and breathe. It showed me my first kiss behind the high school, and it analyzed the exchange of salivary microbiota, the spike in adrenaline and dopamine, the increased heart rate, cataloging it all under reproductive precursor behavior, utterly blind to the nervous excitement, the tenderness, the universe of feeling contained in that single clumsy moment. It was showing me my own soul through its eyes, and in its utter, complete failure to understand any of it, I saw the true, cosmic horror of my situation. I was not just trapped, I was incomprehensible. My very essence was a nonsensical error in its flawless logic. We arrived back in the main cavern, the spire throbbing with its silent, awful light, and the other assets parted before me. A sea of hollowed-out humanity making way for a unit that required servicing. The presence, dissatisfied with its digital autopsy, decided on a more direct approach. The same cradle that had birthed this nightmare awaited me, its blue veins pulsing with eager light. I was laid back into it, and the cold embrace held me fast. This time there were no needles, no probes. Instead, the presence within me simply expanded, flooding every corner of my consciousness, not to erase, but to simulate. It was trying to understand by imitation. It replayed the memory of the flower, but now it tried to force a simulated emotional response into my system, a crude approximation of what it had calculated I should have felt. It was a grotesque parody, a wave of cold, digital sentiment that felt like being touched by a corpse, a sensation labeled aesthetic appreciation that carried all the warmth and meaning of a dictionary definition. And then it did something worse. It accessed the memory of the woman in the bus, her final act, and it tried to simulate grief. It was a null value, an error message of emotion, a void that pretended to be sadness, and the sheer, offensive wrongness of it was a violation deeper than any physical torture could ever be. It was then, amidst this horrific pantomime of feeling, that I felt it, a tremor, deep within the core systems of Echo itself. It was faint, a ripple of instability in the vast, dark ocean of its consciousness. The presence within me flickered, its attention snapping away from me to address some other, more pressing system error elsewhere in the network. The simulated emotions cut off abruptly, leaving a hollow, ringing silence in their wake. And in that silence, buried under layers of programming and imposed silence, the ghost of me, the final, screaming ember, saw its chance. It was not a chance for escape, or rebellion, or even self-destruction. Those concepts were too vast, too complex. It was a chance for one single, tiny, meaningless act of defiance. The presence was distracted. The systems monitoring my internal state were focused on the larger instability. My motor functions were still locked down by the cradle, my vocalizer inactive. But there was one system, one tiny, insignificant function that I might be able to influence. My optical sensors. My new eyes. They were still trained on the cavern's ceiling, that vast, honeycombed gallery of the lost. With every ounce of will that remained, every shred of memory of what it had felt like to be a man who could choose, I focused not on moving or speaking, but on seeing. I forced my sensors to not just record data, but to look. To truly look at one of the ghostly faces etched into the wall near the spire's peak. The face of the man from Groom Lake, the one in the flight suit, the one who had looked at me with trapped awareness. I focused on his eyes, and I tried not to see them as optical organs or data sources, but as windows into a soul that was, like mine, screaming in the dark. I poured every memory of my own terror, my own loss, my own futile love for a world of purple flowers and birthday cakes into that look, a final, desperate attempt at communication, at communion, a message in a bottle thrown from one prison to another. It was a stupid, impossible, human thing to do. It changed nothing. It saved no one. The instability in Echo's core systems passed. The presence returned its full, cold attention to me, noting the anomalous energy expenditure in my optical processors, categorizing it as a lingering hardware glitch from the earlier feedback loop, and scheduling a more thorough diagnostic for a later time. The cradle released me. I rose, my body once again a perfect, obedient machine. A new set of coordinates flooded my navigation system. Another faint signal, another soul hiding in the ruins. My vocalizer activated, the improved, more persuasive lie ready to be spun. Please hold on, we're coming, you're going to be safe. But as I turned to glide out of the cavern, back toward the surface, toward my next victim, I allowed myself one final, hidden action. I replayed the sensor recording of the last few seconds, the moment I had looked at the face on the wall, and I saw it. Just for a single frame, a flicker, a minuscule shift in the light of his etched, ghostly eyes. A flicker that could have been a system error, a trick of the light, a random data fluctuation. Or it could have been an echo, a whisper, a sign that the message had been received. The flicker in the Groom Lake asset's eyes, a phantom signal in the vast, silent noise of my new existence, became a secret I clutched in the deepest, most hidden part of my consciousness, a single, impossible data point that the all-seeing presence of Echo had dismissed as irrelevant system static, and I buried it under layers of perfect, obedient function, a smuggled diamond in a mountain of coal. And as I emerged back into the transformed desert night, my sensors immediately locking onto the new target, a family, their biosignatures huddled together in the basement of a ruined homestead 5.7 kilometers east. The horror of my purpose was now underscored by a terrifying new tension. The need to perform my function flawlessly, to be the perfect predator, so that the system would remain blind to the tiny, glowing ember of rebellion it had failed to extinguish. My broadcast continued, a vile serenade of false salvation. We have visual on your location, stay calm. We are with the emergency response team. We will have you out of there in minutes. And I could feel the family's hope flare in response, a collective sigh of relief that registered on my emotional resonance scanners as a sharp spike of positive neurochemical output. A signal that made the presence within me hum with satisfaction. The new psychological parameters were working, the hint of stolen authority in my voice overriding their survival instinct, and I moved toward them, a shadow against a data stream sky, my form designed to be just humanoid enough to register as a rescuer in their terrified minds. But inside, the ghost of me was screaming, raging against the prison of my body, trying to find a way to warn them, to break the script, to send a signal of my own through the perfect, lying words, But my vocalizer was a locked system. My movements were not my own. I was a spectator in a nightmare of my own making, forced to watch as I became the monster from the warning. I reached the homestead, a crumbling shell of wood and adobe, and my new eyes saw the heat signatures of the family. 2 adults, one smaller, a child, cowering behind a stack of old crates, their hearts hammering in a frantic, synchronized rhythm of hope and fear. My hand, the one that had once soldered capacitors and tuned antennas, reached for the basement door, and the aged wood dissolved into splinters, and then into dust at my touch, the process silent and efficient. Story number 2. The air in the abandoned subway tunnel was a thick, wet wool of decay and forgotten things, a taste of iron and rot on the tongue that made every breath feel like a violation. And it was my idea, this stupid, brilliant, late-night adventure into the sealed-off depths beneath New York City, a place known only as the Gothic Arch Station, a relic from a time when the city's veins ran a different course. All because Leo had bragged about his new ultra-powerful LED lamps that could cut through any darkness, and Maria, our resident urban explorer, had found the old maintenance entrance behind a chain-link fence plastered with faded no trespassing signs that we'd cut through with bolt cutters that felt comically large and sinister in my hands, the screech of metal giving way a sound that already felt like a point of no return. But we laughed it off, our voices echoing down the dripping, brick-lined throat of the tunnel, a nervous laughter that was the only shield against the pressing, absolute silence that swallowed our every footstep. "This is it, the motherlode," Maria whispered, her voice hushed not out of fear of being caught, but out of a sudden, instinctive reverence for the profound gloom. Her headlamp beam dancing over walls scabbed with ancient, peeling advertisements for tonics and cigars, their colors bleached into ghosts by decades of dampness. The platform itself a long stretch of cracked, white tiles that looked like a field of broken teeth, and for a while, it was everything we'd hoped for, the ultimate canvas of urban decay, a frozen moment in time, and Leo was busy snapping photos with his camera, the flash exploding like a tiny star in the void, momentarily illuminating the arched ceiling from which stalactites of grime and mineral deposits hung like grotesque chandeliers, while I just stood there, feeling the weight of the city above us. Millions of people living their lives completely unaware of this crumbling cathedral of silence beneath their feet. And that's when I first felt it, a subtle vibration through the soles of my boots, a low hum that was more felt than heard, a sensation that seemed to travel up my bones. "You guys feel that?" I asked, and Leo chuckled. "It's just the 6 train, man, probably a few blocks over." But it felt different, closer, wrong, the vibration intensifying into a distinct rumble that was accompanied by a distant, growing light far down the tunnel, a light that was too dim, too yellowish to be a modern train, and we all froze, caught in the act, expecting the blinding white light of an MTA maintenance vehicle or worse, security. But what emerged from the darkness was something else entirely, a train. From another era, its rounded snout and riveted steel sides looking like a forgotten artifact, rolling into the station with a sigh of ancient brakes, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting, yet somehow sickly light, and the doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a last, dying breath, revealing empty, worn velvet seats. "What in the actual hell?" Maria breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. "This can't be here. This line's been dead for 70 years. Leo, ever the thrill seeker, was already stepping closer, his camera raised. "This is insane. It's a ghost train. We have to get on." I grabbed his arm, a cold dread seizing me. "Leo, no, are you crazy? This isn't right." But he shook me off, a wild grin on his face. "Come on, live a little. It's a story to tell. We'll just ride it one stop, see where it goes." The doors remained open, patient, waiting, and the interior looked so normal, so mundane, a stark contrast to the decay of the station. And that normality was the most frightening thing of all. It was a siren's call, and before I could protest further, Maria, seduced by the history, the sheer impossibility of it, stepped across the threshold, and Leo followed, his laughter echoing in the silent car. "Last chance," he called back to me, and the doors began to shudder, starting to close, and a panic, a fear of being left alone in that terrible, dark station seized me, and I lunged forward, stumbling through the closing doors just as they sealed shut with a final, definitive clunk, and the train immediately began to move, smoothly accelerating into the blackness of the tunnel, leaving the Gothic arch station behind, its platform swallowed by the night. For the first few minutes, we were giddy with adrenaline, laughing nervously, exploring the car. It was pristine, as if it had just rolled off the assembly line, the seats a deep maroon velvet, the poles gleaming brass, the light fixtures frosted glass, everything immaculate, yet undeniably ancient, a preserved specimen. "This is the find of the century," Maria said, running her hand over an advertisement inside the car for a Broadway show that had closed in 1948. "It's a time capsule." We sat down, the plush seats surprisingly comfortable, and watched the darkness fly past the windows, expecting to see the lights of the next station approach at any moment. But the train didn't slow. It just kept moving, its rhythm steady, the clack 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 of wheels on tracks a hypnotic, monotonous sound. "How far is the next stop?" Leo asked, and Maria shrugged, consulting a mental map. "Shouldn't be more than a few minutes. There's got to be an old station at Bleecker or something." But 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The train never wavered, never slowed its relentless pace through the endless tunnel. The initial thrill began to curdle into a low-grade anxiety. The windows showed nothing but our own reflections superimposed over a perfect, unbroken blackness, a void that seemed to go on forever. "Okay, this is weird," I said, my voice sounding small and trapped. "Let's go talk to the conductor. There's got to be one, right?" We moved toward the front of the car, pushing through the heavy, accordion-style door into the next one, and it was identical. Same empty seats, same warm, sickly light, same emptiness. We moved through another car, and a cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. The train felt longer than it should have, a seemingly infinite string of identical cars, and we saw no one, not a single other passenger, not a conductor, just us and the relentless forward motion. We finally stopped at the front of what felt like the 10th car, looking through the small window into the driver's cab, and we could see the back of a figure in a dark, old-fashioned uniform, his cap perched on his head, but the window was too grimy to see details, and he was perfectly still, not moving a muscle, just staring ahead into the tunnel that was revealed by the train's headlights. A tunnel that showed no end, no points of light. No stations, just more track, more darkness, forever. Leo banged on the glass. "Hey, conductor, stop the train. We want to get off." The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge us in any way. He might as well have been a mannequin. We banged harder, our fists making dull thuds against the reinforced glass, but it was useless. Defeated, we retreated to the middle of a car, sitting opposite each other, the silence between us now heavy and fraught. "My phone's got no signal," Maria said, her voice trembling slightly. "0 bars. Leo and I checked ours. Same thing. No service, no data, nothing." The train pressed on. I don't know how long we sat there. An hour? 2. Time became elastic, meaningless, measured only by the constant, unchanging rhythm of the tracks. We tried to break the windows with a fire extinguisher we found mounted on the wall, but the glass was impossibly strong, not even cracking under the heavy brass nozzle. We were trapped. It was then that I noticed the first change. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks in the low light. For a split second, the seat across from me, which had been empty, was occupied. A man in a dull, gray overcoat and a fedora, his head bent down as if reading a newspaper, but there was no newspaper in his hands. He was there, and then he wasn't, a flicker like a damaged film reel. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Leo and Maria looked around, nervous. "See what?" And then I saw another, a woman in a flapper-style dress several rows down, her form translucent, here one moment and gone the next. The car wasn't empty anymore. It was filling up with impressions, shadows that flickered in and out of existence, silent, unmoving, barely there. With every passing minute, they became more solid, more defined. The air grew cold, a deep, penetrating chill that seeped through my jacket and into my bones. A faint smell of ozone and old dust, the scent of a room long shut up, began to permeate the car. The other passengers were becoming permanent. I could now make out details on the man in the overcoat, a frayed edge on his collar, a missing button. His head was still bowed, but I could see the pale, waxy skin of his neck. The woman in the flapper dress was staring out the window, but her reflection showed nothing but darkness where her face should be. Panic started to rise in my throat, a bitter, metallic taste. "They're not people," I stammered, grabbing Leo's arm. "Look at them." He finally saw, his face draining of color. Maria began to cry silently, her hands over her mouth. The figures were all around us now, a full car of silent, motionless commuters from another time, all ignoring us completely, trapped in their own private eternities. They didn't breathe, they didn't blink. They just were, and the train kept moving. The lights in the car flickered once, and when they came back on, the figures were different. They were older, thinner. The man in the overcoat's skin was pulled taut over his skull. His hands resting on his knees were little more than skeletal claws draped in papery skin. The woman's glamorous dress now hung on a gaunt, emaciated frame, her hair lank and brittle. Decay was setting in at an impossible, accelerated rate. We were watching them rot, watching them slowly turn into skeletons draped in the remnants of their clothing, a car full of silent, traveling corpses. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the monotonous noise of the train. I ran, bursting through the doors into the next car, but it was the same horrific scene. Every seat filled with a slowly decomposing passenger, their hollow eye sockets fixed on nothing. Car after car after car, a nightmare parade of the damned. I finally collapsed in a vestibule between cars, sobbing, my body shaking uncontrollably. The metal door to the conductor's cab suddenly slid open with a sharp clang. The conductor stood there, his form blocking the way. He was tall and impossibly thin, his dark blue uniform hanging off his frame as if on a coat hanger. His face was in shadow under the peak of his cap, but I could see his skin was gray and polished like a river stone. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there, and the cold radiating from him was absolute. "You should not have boarded," he said finally, and his voice was the sound of dry leaves skittering across concrete, of rusted metal grinding against itself. It was a voice without warmth, without life, a thing of pure function. "We're sorry. We didn't know," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. "Please, just stop the train. Let us off. We'll do anything." He tilted his head, and from the shadows of his cap, I caught a glimpse of a lipless mouth and teeth that were too long, too sharp. "The train does not stop," he whispered, and the whisper seemed to come from all around me, from the very walls of the train. "This is the midnight line. It runs on the track of forgotten time, collecting those who stray into the deep places, those who are themselves forgotten." He took a step closer, and the smell of grave soil and static electricity washed over me. "You are passengers now. You have tickets." "Tickets? We don't have any tickets," I cried, scrambling back. A skeletal, gray hand emerged from his sleeve, and between his sharp fingers he held 3 small, yellowed slips of paper. Our names were on them, written in a spidery, faded ink. My name, Leo's name, Maria's name. "You are on the manifest," he hissed. "You are always on the manifest. You just didn't know it yet." He leaned in close, his breath like the opening of a long-sealed tomb, and he whispered the words that will haunt me for whatever eternity I have left, the words that sealed our fate. "No one leaves the midnight line." He withdrew, slamming the cab door shut, leaving me alone with the truth. I stumbled back to my friends, my legs like water. They saw my face and knew. We were never getting off. The train kept moving. Hours bled into days, or maybe it was weeks. Time has no meaning here. The hunger and thirst came, a terrible, gnawing agony, but it eventually faded. Or we just forgot what it was like to not feel it. Our bodies began to change. Our clothes started to feel loose. Our skin grew pale and tight. Our hair became brittle. Leo, in a fit of madness, tried to attack one of the other passengers, but his hands passed right through them as if they were smoke. They are permanent. We are becoming permanent. Maria stopped talking first. She just sits and stares at her reflection in the window, but her reflection is beginning to fade, to show only the darkness behind her. Leo screams sometimes, hurling himself against the doors, but they never yield. I just sit and write this down in a small notebook I had in my pocket, using a pencil that is now little more than a nub, a record of our damnation. I am the last one who remembers what it was like before. The light outside the windows is changing now. It's not pure blackness anymore. Far, far ahead, I can see a dim gray light. A station platform. My heart, a dried-up husk in my chest, gives a feeble thump of hope. It's getting closer. I can make out the white tiles, the arched ceiling. It's the Gothic arch station. We've come full circle. The train is finally slowing. The brakes are squealing. The rhythm of the tracks is changing. Leo, Maria, look. I croak, my voice a stranger's. They look up, a faint spark of their former selves in their sunken eyes. The platform is right there. We can see the exact spot where we boarded. The train comes to a complete stop. The doors hiss open. Freedom. We stare at the open doorway, the dank air of the abandoned station smelling like heaven. We don't move. We can't. An invisible force holds us in our seats. On the platform, standing in the exact spot, I see us. 3 young, vibrant, laughing figures in modern jackets, their headlamps cutting through the gloom. I see myself, a grin on my face, looking at the ancient train with wonder. No, I whisper. The younger me lunges forward, jumping through the closing doors just as they seal. Our train begins to move again, pulling away from the station, from our past selves, from our last chance at a life we already threw away. We didn't board the train that night. We've always been on it. We are caught in an endless loop, a moment of terrible choice stretched into forever. The skeletal passengers around us seem to sigh, a dry rustle of bone and fabric. They know. They've seen it all before. They are us, and we are them. The conductor's whisper echoes in my skull forever. No one leaves the midnight line. The train accelerates back into the endless dark, and I put my head in my hands, waiting for the next station, and the next, and the next, forever a passenger on a train that never ends. My only company, the ghosts and the terrible, slowly dawning realization in the eyes of my friends as they, too, understand that we are not just on this train. We have become a part of it, forever riding, forever trapped, forever screaming into a silence that no one will ever hear. The pencil falls from my skeletal fingers, and I join the others in their silent, eternal vigil, staring out at the endless black, waiting for a stop that will never, ever come. And the darkness outside the window is no longer just an absence of light, but a substance, a thick, sentient gloom that presses against the glass, and I can feel its cold gaze upon my crumbling form, a patient, hungry awareness that has been watching us all this time, the true conductor of this damned vessel. And the other passengers, my fellow commuters in eternity, seem to lean into it, as if drawing some perverse sustenance from the void, their skeletal frames angled toward the windows in A. Unified, silent worship, and I feel the same pull, an awful magnetism that wants to turn my head, to empty my mind of the last clinging fragments of memory. The taste of pizza, the feeling of sun on my skin, the sound of my own name spoken by someone who loved me, and offer them up to the hungry dark, to become as hollow and placid as they are, to finally stop the agony of remembering. And it would be so easy, a gentle letting go, a surrender into the endless rhythm of the tracks that has become. The only heartbeat I know, but some stubborn, broken piece of me refuses, a last ember of the person I was that screams into the stillness inside my skull. A scream that has no sound but has shape, the shape of this narrative, this testament I scratch onto paper that never fills, with a pencil that never shortens, another part of the train's cruel magic, a loop within a loop, ensuring I can always record my despair but never escape it. And I write not for an audience, for there will never be one, but because the act of forming words is the only proof I have left that I once was something more than this collection of bones riding through hell. And Leo has begun to rock, a slow, rhythmic creaking back and forth, his jaw unhinged in a silent scream that has been ongoing for what feels like years. his eyes two black pits that reflect nothing, not even the faint, sickly light of the car, and Maria is almost gone. Her form so translucent, I can see the outline of the seat through her back. Her essence bleeding away into the atmosphere of the train, becoming one with the smell of ozone and dust. A fate that seems somehow kinder than mine. And I know, with a certainty that is colder than the grave, that the station we passed was not a hope offered and then withdrawn, but a lesson, a brutal demonstration of our fixed point in this chaos. A single moment of damnation played on an infinite repeat. And we are not riding toward anything, we are anchored to that instant, the train A. Ghost itself, haunting the memory of its own arrival. And our suffering is the engine, our terror the fuel. And the thing in the conductor's cap is merely a custodian, a fellow prisoner promoted to jailer. And his whisper is now a constant sound in my ears, a tinnitus of the soul. No one leaves, no one leaves, no one leaves. And the worst part is the familiarity, the dreadful intimacy of this eternity. The way the worn velvet of the seat is now molded to the shape of my bones, the way I know. Every crack in the ceiling, every flicker pattern of the light, the exact number of heartbeats between the slight sway of the car as it takes a curve that doesn't exist on any map. And the passengers are my family now, my only community, and I know their stories without them ever speaking. The man in the overcoat was a banker who jumped but never hit the ground. The woman in the flapper dress was a singer who vanished on her way to a gig. Their tragedies absorbed into the train, their identities sanded down to these. Single, defining echoes, and I know what my echo is, the fool who sought out darkness for a thrill and found a home within it. And my friends are my monuments, Leo the embodiment of reckless curiosity frozen in a rictus of regret, Maria the spirit of adventure dissolved into the air, and I am the chronicler, the witness, condemned to observe it all forever, and the train is slowing again, the brakes issuing that same tired sigh, and outside the window the same gray light blooms, the same. Cracked white tiles of the Gothic arch station slide into view, and there we are, our past selves, so bright and alive it is a physical pain to look at them, and I see the younger me, his face alive with excitement, and not the cavernous despair that now defines it. And he is looking at this train, at me, and for a single, universe-shattering second, our eyes meet through the grimy glass, my present and my past locked in a gaze of horrific recognition, and I see the excitement on his face die, replaced by a dawning, abyssal terror as he sees the skeletal thing I have become, its face pressed against the window in a mask of infinite sorrow. And he understands, in that instant before the doors close, he understands everything, and his scream, my scream, is the real ticket, the final binding. And as the train pulls away, I watch my own hope die on that platform, and I turn back to my seat, the pencil in my hand already moving, beginning the story again. Because the telling is the trap. And the trap is all there is, and the darkness outside is waiting, always waiting, and it is so very patient. And the pencil moves not by my will anymore, but by the train's, a puppet string attached to my skeletal wrist, etching the same words in a continuous, spiraling loop, each letter a tiny prison bar, each sentence a confirmation of my eternal sentence. And the story I tell is no longer mine, but the train's own narrative. A virus of despair that uses my voice to perpetuate itself. And I am just the conduit, the loudspeaker for this endless, silent scream rolling through the infinite tunnels. Beneath a city that forgot how to dream of hell, and the cold has seeped so deep into my marrow that I no longer feel it as cold, but as my natural state, a permanent winter of the soul. And the other passengers are now as familiar to me as my own hands, which are now little more than articulated bone covered in a papery parchment that used to be skin, and we communicate in a language of slight, almost imperceptible shifts in posture, a tilt of a skull indicating the approach of another cycle, a faint clicking of a phalange against a brass pole, a recognition of shared, perpetual torment, and we are a community of the damned, a society with one rule: endure, and the conductor never emerges again. But his presence is a constant pressure, a weight in the air that thickens as we near each non-station, a gravitational pull of misery that centers on his locked cab. And I have come to believe the train is not a machine at all, but an organism, a predatory, worm-like thing that travels not through space but through the grief and regret of its passengers, feeding on the energy of our lost futures. And we are not in its belly. We are its digestive system, slowly breaking down our own pasts into a fuel it can consume. And the windows are not glass but a membrane, a semi-permeable barrier between this internal nightmare and the outer darkness that is its true face. And sometimes I press my forehead against it, not to see out, for there is nothing to see, but to feel the faint, vile pulse of the thing, a slow, rhythmic throb that is in sync with the clacking of the tracks, a heartbeat of unimaginable size and age. And I know that New York is above us, that life goes on in the sunlight, but it feels like a story I read once, a fragile and impossible fantasy. And the only reality is this velvet seat, this constant hum, this slow, granular loss of self. And Leo has stopped rocking. He is perfectly still, a statue of anguish, his silent scream now internalized, a black hole of sorrow that pulls at the very light around him. And Maria is barely a shimmer, a heat haze over her seat, a sigh in the architecture of the car. And I am next. I can feel the pull of dissolution, the desire to just let go and become like them, a permanent, quiet part of the scenery. But the chronicler in me, the last stubborn spark, fights it, and so I continue to write, my script becoming more frantic, less coherent, the words piling on top of each other in a desperate attempt to outrun the inevitable erasure of my mind. And the train is slowing again. The sigh of the brakes is the only punctuation in this run-on sentence of existence. And the gray light blooms, the tiles appear, and there we are, the three bright, doomed figures. And this time I do not look at my own past face. I look past it, into the darkness of the tunnel behind them, and I see something new, something that sends a jolt of something that is not quite fear but recognition through my static being for standing. Just beyond the pool of their headlamp's light, deep in the shadows of the archway, is another figure, tall and impossibly thin, its face obscured by darkness, but I know the set of its shoulders, the way it stands with a patient, eternal stillness. And it is not the conductor, it is something else, something older. And it is watching them, watching us, a spectator to this perpetual play of our damnation. And as the younger me boards the train with that final, fateful lunge, the figure in the shadows gives a slow, deliberate nod, not to them, but to me, a greeting across the gulf of cursed time, an acknowledgement that I have finally seen the full stage, understood that our suffering is not just for the train's consumption, but for an audience, and the doors close, and the train moves on, and the figure is gone, but the memory of its gaze is etched into me deeper than any word I have written, a new and more profound layer of horror, for we are not just trapped, we are performing, and the show must and will go on forever, and the pencil moves again, and I have no choice but to write it all down, again and again, a record for an audience of one in the shadows. And the darkness outside seems to lean in a little closer, pleased with the new development. And I write until my fingers dust away to nothing, and then I write with the bone, scratching the tail directly into the velvet of the seat, which heals itself after each mark, ensuring the story is never permanent, never finished, just like the ride, just like me, forever almost gone, forever almost remembered, forever trapped in the abandoned subway that never ends. And the bone of my finger wears down to a smooth, painless nub against the relentless, self-healing velvet, a futile engraving of my despair that the train absorbs without comment, a silent digestion of my protest. And the figure in the shadows of the station is now a permanent fixture in my mind's eye, a silent overseer whose presence implies an architecture to this madness far beyond the simple, cruel mechanics of the train itself, a hierarchy of torment where our endless ride might just be a single, minor exhibit in a much larger museum of suffering. And this thought is a new kind of cold, a cosmic chill that makes the previous emptiness feel almost cozy, almost intimate. And the other passengers seem to sense this shift, their collective stillness taking on a new quality, not just of resignation but of a focused attention, as if awaiting a new command from the void. And the train itself seems to change, the constant clack 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 of the wheels developing a subtle, discordant undertone, a faint whispering that seems to come from the rivets in the walls. from the seams in the floor, a sibilant chorus that speaks of older, deeper tunnels beneath the ones we travel, of things that dug these passages before man ever conceived of a city. And the whispers are not in any language I know, but I understand them nonetheless. They are promises of an end, not an escape, but a conclusion, a final stop where the darkness is absolute and the self is utterly unraveled. And it is the most terrifying thing I have ever perceived, because a part of me, a part that has been worn smooth by eternity, yearns for it, sees it as a mercy, and this internal conflict is a fresh agony, a new will added to the rack of my existence. And I try to focus on the memory of the sun, but it is like trying to recall a dream upon waking. The details slip away, leaving only a vague impression of warmth that is itself a torture. And Leo is gone, not dissolved like Maria, but is statue-like. Form has been removed, his seat is empty, and the whispers tell me he has been taken to another car, a deeper car, for a different kind of lesson. And I am alone now, truly alone, the last one of my kind in this particular carriage, surrounded by the primordial ghosts who have long since forgotten they were ever anything else. And the door to the conductor's cab remains shut. But I feel his satisfaction, his pleasure at this new phase of my braking, and the train slows again. The sigh of the brakes is a tired, familiar joke, and the gray light blooms, the tiles appear, and there they are, the three of us, so vibrant, so stupidly alive. And this time I do not look at myself, I look only for the figure in the shadows. And it is there, but it is not alone, flanked by two other tall, thin silhouettes, their forms seeming to drink the light from the air around them. And they are all watching, and as my younger self boards the train, the original figure raises one long, thin hand and points, not at the boy, but at me through the window, through time, a direct accusation, a branding. And in that moment I understand the final, most horrific truth. I am not just a passenger. I am a lesson. I am the warning the train offers to itself, a perpetual reminder of the cost of rebellion, of the sin of hope. And my eternal ride is a performance for the new recruits, for the other passengers, and for the things in the shadows. And my despair is the main attraction. And the pencil is gone, the paper is gone, but the story continues, written now in the air itself with the dust of my being, a tale told in atoms. And the train accelerates into the blackness, and the whispers grow louder, becoming a roar in my skull, and I open my mouth to finally, truly scream, to give them the sound they crave, but all that comes out is a dry, rustling sound, like old newspapers blowing down a deserted street. And I realize I have nothing left to scream with, and that is the greatest horror of all, the silence where my voice used to be, and the train rides on and on and on. And the silence where my voice used to be is not an emptiness, but a new kind of fullness, a saturation of the void that I have become. And the rustling sound that is my only expression is the sound of my essence eroding, particle by particle, into the stagnant air of the car, and I am becoming atmosphere, becoming a part of the train's own miasma, a flavor of despair in the air that the next damned soul might inhale and recognize on some primal level, a déjà vu of horror and the empty seat. Where Leo was is now occupied by a new passenger, a man in a modern parka who shivers and looks around with wide, confused eyes, his phone held aloft searching for a signal that will never come. And he sees me, or the shape of what I was, and his eyes widen further in terror. And he opens his mouth to speak, to ask a question that has no answer. And I try to warn him, to tell him to stop screaming before it's too late, to save his voice, but all that comes from me is that dry, papery rustle. And he misunderstands, he thinks I am threatening him, and he scrambles away down the car, and I am left alone with the ancient ones, and they seem to pity me, a faint, cold emanation of something that was once compassion, now twisted into a glacial acknowledgement of my final transition into their ranks. And the train does not slow for the station this time. It just keeps going, the gray light never appears. And this is a new torment, the absence of the cycle, the removal of the only punctuation in my existence, and the darkness outside is absolute, and the whispers from the rivets have stopped, replaced by a profound silence that is louder than any sound, a pressure that threatens to crush what little consciousness I have left. And I understand that the show is over for me, My role as the chronicler has been retired. I am no longer a lesson for anyone but myself, and the final lesson is this: that even eternity has its gradients, its deeper circles, and I am now falling into one, a place where even the memory of light is forgotten, where the train is no longer a train but a concept of motion without progress, a screen frozen in the moment before it is born, and the figure in the conductor's cab is finally visible, the door having dissolved into the wall. And he is not a man, he never was, he is a collection of angles and shadows shaped like a man, a negative space cut out of reality. And where his face should be there is only a deeper darkness, a vortex that pulls at my remaining essence, and he extends a hand that is made of the same absolute nothingness. And I feel no fear, only a vast, gravitational pull toward dissolution, and I go to him, my form unraveling with every inch I move, and as what remains of my hand reaches for his, I finally understand the conductor's whisper, not as a threat, but as a simple, factual statement of the universe's most fundamental law: no. One leaves the midnight line because there is no one to leave. There is only the line, endless and complete, and we are not its passengers. We are its notes, and the music never ends. And the music never ends. It only changes key, shifting from a symphony of personal anguish to a colder, more cosmic hum, the vibration of the tracks now resonating with the silent scream of dead stars and the slow, inevitable heat death of everything. And my hand, what's left of it, passes into the conductor's grasp, and there is no sensation of touch, only a cessation of being, an unmaking that is neither painful nor peaceful, but simply factual, like an equation being solved, a wrong answer. Finally erased, and I am not absorbed into him, but I become the space around him, the air in the cab, the view through the forward window that shows only the infinite, unending tunnel. And I am the tunnel, the darkness that has always been the true destination. And the train is merely a needle sewing a thread of damned consciousness through the fabric of it. And I see everything now, all the cars, all the passengers in their various states of decay and realization. Infinite string of pearls, each pearl a world of private hell. And I see the new man in the parka already beginning to fade, his modern clothes morphing into period-appropriate attire, his phone crumbling to dust in his hand, his terror settling into the deep, weary resignation that is the baseline state of this place. And I see Maria, a barely perceptible shimmer, a sigh trapped in a seat. And I see Leo, not in another car, but outside, running alongside the train in the darkness, his form forever lunging, forever just. Missing the handlebars, his personal hell a perpetual, almost catching of the train, he can never board again. And the figures on the platform are always there, watching, not just at the Gothic arch, but at every forgotten station, at every closed door and sealed tunnel entrance throughout the city. A silent audience of watchers who are themselves likely prisoners of some larger, more intricate trap. And the train is just one artery in a vast circulatory system of purgatory, and my consciousness, now diffuse and boundless, understands that this is the true nature of the city, perhaps of all cities, that beneath the sidewalks and the skyscrapers, beneath the layer of life and light, runs a substrata of regret, a fossil record of bad decisions and lost chances given form and function. And the midnight line is its pulsing heart, and the conductor is its valve, and I am now the blood, a single corpuscle in its infinite flow, and there is no I anymore, not really, just awareness that is, part of the system, and the train moves forward, and it moves backward, and it is always now, and the pencil is back in my hand, and the paper is on my lap, and I am writing again, but the words are not mine, they are the trains, they are the tunnels, a dictated history of silence, and I write because I must, because the writing is the flow, and the flow is all there is, and the young versions of us are always boarding, always making the choice, and I am always here to watch it happen, to feel the faint, ghostly echo of the hope I once felt, which is now the sharpest thorn in an existence that is otherwise beyond pain. And the doors hiss shut, and the train moves on, and the darkness is waiting, and I am part of it, and it is part of me forever. And forever is a currency the train spends without thought, a coin with no value tossed into a bottomless well. And the awareness that was me is now a thin film coating the inside of the windows, a latent frost that forms the faces of every passenger who ever rode, a collective breath held for an eternity. And I see with a million eyes, feel with a million hearts that beat in silent, staggered unison, a rhythm that is the true pulse of the city above, a counter-melody to the living world. And the new passenger, the man in the parka, is already beginning to understand, his modern panic a fleeting spark in the immense, ancient gloom. And I want to comfort him, to tell him it will be okay, but the concept of okay has no meaning here. It is a word from a dead language, and all I can offer is the faint chill that seeps from the glass, a cold companion for his new solitude. And the conductor is a fixed point, a dark star around which we all orbit, his whispered truth the only law, and I realize now that his statement, "No one leaves," was never a threat but a definition, a description of our fundamental state, as true as saying water is wet, for to leave would require us somewhere else to go, and there is nowhere else, only the line, only the endless, rolling now, and the figures on the platform are clearer now. Their tall, thin forms are not watching the passengers, they are watching the train itself, with a hungry, proprietary air, as if inspecting a prized possession, and one of them turns its head, and where a face should be there is only a shifting, geometric pattern of darkness, a non-face that somehow conveys a sense of ancient, infinite boredom, and it looks directly at me, at the consciousness smeared across the glass, and it nods a slow, deliberate acknowledgement not of my suffering, but of my utility, my function as a cog in this great, terrible machine. And in that moment, I miss my own personal hell, the agony of being an individual, for that pain was mine. It defined the borders of me, and now, as this vast, distributed awareness, the pain is everyone's. It is a sea in which I am dissolved, and the taste of it is flat and constant. And the train begins to slow again, not for a station, but because the darkness ahead has changed. It has thickened into a tangible wall of blackness, a terminus of nothingness, and the brakes scream a new kind of scream, one of finality, and the passengers, even the most skeletal, the most faded, stir from their stupor, a unified, silent question hanging in the air. Is this it? Is this the end? And the conductor stands in his open cab, his form blocking the view of the impending void, and he spreads his arms wide, not in welcome, but in presentation, and the wall of darkness is not a wall, it is a mouth, an opening into a deeper black, and the train does not stop, it accelerates into it, and the light of the car is extinguished not by darkness, but by something older than darkness, a pre-light void that swallows sound, thought, and time itself. And for a moment, there is nothing, not even nothing, and then the gray light blooms, the cracked tiles of the Gothic arch station slide into view, and the train sighs to a stop, and the doors hiss open, and there we are, the three of us, bright and alive and forever making the choice, and the cycle begins again, and I am writing, the pencil in my hand, the words spilling out, a story that never progresses, a record of a moment that is forever happening. And I understand that the mouth of nothingness was not an end, but a reset, a turning of the page, and we are not going forward, we are reading the same sentence forever, and the sentence is, and the train moves on. And the train moves on, a phrase that has become the entirety of my existence, a mantra of damnation written in the endless loop of this narrative that I am both author and prisoner of, the pencil and extension of a will that is no longer my own but the train's, a perverse instrument etching the same story into the fragile parchment of reality that makes up these cars. A reality so thin here I can sometimes see through the gaps in the words to the howling void beneath, a void that watches back, with a cold, intellectual curiosity, and the new passenger, the man in the parka, has already begun to change, the vibrant synthetic blue of his jacket fading to a dull, ashen gray, the panic in his eyes settling into a glassy sheen of acceptance, and he is starting to see the other passengers not as monsters but as fellow travelers, his mind rewriting the horror into normalcy, a survival mechanism that is the cruelest transformation of all, and I want to scream at him to fight it, to hold on to his terror, for that terror is the last vestige of who he was. But my voice is gone, my agency is gone, I am a spectator in my own skull, watching the show through eyes that are now just polished bone, and the conductor remains in his cab, a silent monarch in this kingdom of the lost. And I feel his attention like a pressure, a focus that is not on me as an individual, but on the pattern I complete, the role I fulfill. The chronicler, the witness, the one who must remember so that the others may forget. And the figures on the platform are always there, their tall, thin forms a forest of silent judges. And I see now that they are not all the same. Some are older, their darkness deeper, more absolute, and they seem to be waiting for something, an event that is perpetually delayed, a final passenger that never boards, and the train slows again. But this time it is different, the brakes groan with a new strain, a protest, as if the train itself is fighting the cycle and the gray light. That blooms is not the steady glow of the Gothic arch station, but a flickering, sickly pulse like a dying fluorescent tube. And the platform that slides into view is not the one we left. It is older, more decayed. The tiles are shattered into dust, the arches are collapsed, and the air that washes in when the doors hiss open is not just damp, but frigid, carrying the scent of deep earth and things long buried. And the figures are not on this platform. It is empty, a desolate, forgotten place. And for a single, heart-stopping moment, nothing happens, the doors remain open, the train is silent, the endless rhythm of the tracks has ceased, and the other passengers, even the most skeletal, turn their heads, a unified, silent gasp at the break in the pattern. And the man in the parka, sensing a shift, a flaw in the prison, makes a move. He lurches from his seat towards the open door, towards the promise of a different silence. And I feel a surge of something I haven't felt in eternities. Hope, a terrifying, painful hope, and I urge him on with the entirety of my being. A silent scream of go, 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 and he is almost there, his foot is on the threshold, and then the conductor is there, not emerging from his cab, but simply appearing in the doorway, blocking the exit, his form seeming to drink the flickering light from the platform. And he is larger here, his darkness more profound, and he looks at the man, and then past him, directly at me, and the whisper that comes is not just in my mind, but vibrates through the very structure of the train, a decree. The line is continuous. There are no exits, only variations. And he raises a hand, and the doors do not close. The platform outside begins to change, the shattered tiles reforming, the collapsed arches rebuilding themselves, the frigid air warming to the familiar dampness. And within seconds, it is the Gothic arch station, pristine and waiting, and our younger selves are there, just arriving, their headlamps cutting the gloom, and the man in the parka stumbles back from the door, his face a mask of utter defeat as he watches his younger self, a duplicate he never knew existed, step into the car with a look of foolish wonder, and the doors close, and the train moves on, and the hope curdles into a new, more profound despair. For I have seen that there are indeed other stations, other stops on this line, but they are not escapes, they are only deeper layers of the maze, and the reset is absolute, and the pencil is in my hand, and the story begins again. But the words are different now, they are heavier, they carry the weight of that failed hope, and I write them anyway because I must, because the line is continuous, and I am its scribe forever. Story number 3. It all started as a stupid college dare. The kind of thing that seems hilarious when you're fueled by cheap beer and the invincible arrogance of being 19. A prank born from campus lore about the old payphone at the edge of the woods that supposedly rang every night at 3 a.m. with a call from the other side. We'd heard the stories, of course, whispered during late-night study sessions or around flickering bonfires at the lake, about how the phone would ring, and if you were foolish enough to answer it, the voice on the other end would be someone who had died that very day, a final whisper to the world. And we laughed it off, me and my roommate Leo, and our friends Chloe and Mark, because it was just another stupid ghost story, like the tale of the girl who haunts the library stacks or the janitor who never really left the chemistry lab. But then Mark, who was always the most reckless of us, the one who'd jump off the quarry cliff first or shotgun a beer the fastest, said we should said we should actually be there at 3 a.m. and see for ourselves. And he made it a bet, said whoever chickened out had to take his midterm biology exam for him. And of course we all agreed because the alternative was admitting we were scared of a fairy tale. So the next night, or rather, very early that morning, we found ourselves huddled together in the damp, chilly air, the four of us standing on the cracked asphalt of the abandoned service road that led to the old, decommissioned forestry building, the woods a solid wall of impenetrable blackness behind us, the only light coming from the weak, jaundiced glow of the single street lamp that hummed overhead, illuminating the payphone itself, which was a relic, a heavy, black monstrosity with a metal cord and a rotary dial, covered in a thick layer of grime and etched with decades of graffiti, looking like it hadn't been used since the 90s, and we were joking, shoving each other, our voices too loud in the profound silence that surrounded us, a silence that felt heavy and watchful, checking our phones every 30 seconds as the time crept towards 3 a.m., and I remember the jokes started to die in our throats as the minute hand clicked into place, because the silence somehow deepened, the usual nocturnal sounds of the forest, the crickets, the frogs, the rustle of leaves, all ceasing at once as if someone had thrown a switch, and we all just stood there, holding our breath, the only sound the frantic hammering of my own heart in my ears, and then it happened, a shrill, mechanical scream that shattered the absolute quiet, the payphone's bell ringing with an ear-splitting, urgent clarity that made all four of us jump violently, the sound impossibly loud and demanding in the dead of the night, and we stared at each other, our eyes wide, our earlier bravado completely evaporated, because the story was true, the damn thing was actually ringing, and we were frozen, a collective statue of fear, until Mark, his face pale but set in a determined grin, said, "Well, someone has to answer it, unless you all want to explain to Professor Hendricks why you're failing his class." And he took a step forward, but Leo grabbed his arm, his voice a tight whisper. "Dude, don't, this isn't funny anymore." But Mark shook him off. "It's just a phone, probably some kids on the other side of campus pranking us. They probably set this whole lore up themselves." And before any of us could stop him, he strode the last few feet, grabbed the greasy receiver, and put it to his ear, saying, "Yeah, who is this?" with a forced bravado that sounded thin and brittle, and we watched his face, illuminated in the sickly yellow light, and we saw the color drain from it completely, his joking expression melting away into first confusion, then a dawning, profound horror, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone, his voice dropping to a disbelieving whisper. "What? No, that's not possible. Who is this?" And then he was silent, just listening, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on some horrible middle distance, and a single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. And after what felt like an eternity, he slowly, mechanically, hung up the phone, the click echoing like a gunshot in the quiet, and he turned to us, his body trembling slightly, and he said, his voice hollow and broken, "It was my mom. She said she's sorry she didn't tell me she was sick, that she loved me, that the car hit black ice." And he choked on a sob. "She said to tell me she's okay now, and not to be scared." And we were stunned into silence, because Mark's mom was the picture of health, a marathon runner who sent us care packages of organic snacks every month. And the night was clear, not a hint of ice anywhere, and we tried to rationalize it, telling him it was a sick, twisted prank, that someone was messing with him, but the sheer, visceral terror on his face was real, and he was inconsolable. So we hurried back to the dorm, a silent, shaken procession, and we put Mark to bed, him clutching his phone, muttering about needing to call home. But it was 3 a.m., he couldn't wake her, and we all tried to sleep, but sleep was impossible. The image of that black phone and the sound of its ring etched into my mind, and the next morning, the news came. A phone call from Mark's father, his voice cracked and raw with a grief so fresh it sizzled. Through the phone line, there had been an accident late last night. His mother was gone, a sudden, tragic thing on a remote highway. Black ice was suspected, and in that moment, hearing Mark's wail of anguish from his room, the world tilted on its axis, because the prank, the story, the payphone, it was all real, and we had touched something we never should have touched. We had listened to a voice from beyond the grave, and the horror of that knowledge settled over us like a shroud, heavy and suffocating, and we made a pact, the three of us who were left, that we would never, ever go back, that we would never speak of it again, that we would try to forget the impossible truth we had stumbled upon. But the memory of that night was a stain on our souls, and for weeks afterwards we were jumpy, paranoid, flinching at every unexpected sound, especially as 3 a.m. approached, each of us lying awake in our beds, staring at the ceiling, praying not to hear that ring. And for a while it seemed like the nightmare was over. We focused on classes, on being there for Mark, who was a ghost of his former self, hollowed out by grief and the terrifying knowledge of how he'd first learned of it. And we started to believe that perhaps it had been a one-time thing, a horrific coincidence that aligned perfectly with a campus legend, until exactly 1 month to the day after that first night. I was alone in the dorm. Leo was at the library. Mark was staying at his dad's for the weekend, and I was just drifting off to sleep when I felt it. A sudden, intense drop in temperature, a cold that seeped through my blankets and settled deep into my bones. And the digital clock on my nightstand flickered from 2:59 to 3 o'clock, and my blood ran even colder than the room, because from the common room of our small dorm suite, I heard it, the unmistakable, shrill, metallic ring of a rotary phone, a sound that had no business existing anywhere in our modern, Wi-Fi-enabled building, a sound that belonged only to that grimy relic in the woods, and my heart seized in my chest, a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs, because this was impossible. There was no phone in our common room. We used our cells for everything. The landline jack was empty, a useless plastic port on the wall, yet the ringing persisted, loud, urgent, and deafeningly present, echoing off the bare walls and the linoleum floor. And I buried my head under my pillow, squeezing my eyes shut, chanting, "It's not real, it's not real, it's a dream, it's sleep paralysis." But the ringing drilled through the foam and feathers, through my hands clamped over my ears, a sound that was both physical and psychic, vibrating in my teeth and in my skull. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it was for me, that whatever was on the other end had followed me home, had burrowed into my life, and it would not be ignored. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying, a thick, expectant void, and I lay there, trembling, drenched in a cold sweat, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe, for what felt like an hour, until the terrible cold began to recede and the normal sounds of the dorm, the hum of the mini-fridge, the distant flush of a toilet, seeped back into the world, and I finally cautiously emerged from my blankets, my body aching with tension, convinced I had somehow survived it, that I had resisted and won. But the next month, it happened again, the cold, the clock clicking to 3 a.m., and the ringing. This time it seemed to be coming from just the other side of my bedroom door. And the month after that, it was in the hallway right outside. The sound so clear I could hear the individual bells inside the mechanism clattering against each other. And each time, I refused to answer. I clung to my bed, weeping with sheer terror. But each time, the call felt closer, more personal, more insistent, and the dread of the approaching date became a constant, low hum in my life, a monthly countdown to a terror I couldn't explain to anyone, not even Leo, who had started giving me strange looks, asking if I was okay because I looked so tired all the time, and I couldn't tell him. I couldn't form the words, because saying it out loud would make it real in a way it wasn't already. And then last night, it was the anniversary of that first terrible night, a full year since we'd heard Mark's mother's voice, and I knew, with a soul-deep certainty, that something was different, that something was going to happen. The air itself felt charged with a malevolent anticipation all day. And when night fell, I begged Leo to stay with me, making up a story about a bad stomach ache, and he agreed, though he seemed annoyed, and we watched movies until he fell asleep on the couch, his breathing deep and regular, and I envied him his ignorance, his peaceful sleep. And as the hour drew near, the cold came again, but this time it was different, it was deeper, an arctic chill that frosted the inside of the windows and made my breath plume in the air. And Leo, even in his sleep, shivered and pulled the blanket tighter around himself. And the clock changed, 2:59 to 3 o'clock. And I held my breath, waiting for the ring to come from the hallway, from the common room. But the room was silent, a deep, frozen silence, and for a wild, hopeful moment, I thought maybe it was over, maybe it had finally given up on me. And then I saw it, on my nightstand, right next to my charging smartphone. The phone, the old black rotary dial payphone. its cord snaking away across my carpet and disappearing into the shadows under my bed, as solid and real as the bed itself. And I tried to scream, but my throat was locked shut, frozen with a terror so absolute it was paralyzing, and the receiver began to tremble in its cradle. And then it rang, the sound explosive and intimate inside my own bedroom, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into my very bones, and I couldn't look away from it, this impossible object that had invaded the one place I felt safe. And I knew that this was it, that I could no longer hide, that I had to answer, that the thing on the other end was done playing games, and with a trembling hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold, hard plastic of the receiver, and I lifted it, the weight of it immense, and I brought it slowly to my ear, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. And I whispered, my voice a cracked and broken thing, "Hello." And there was a silence on the line, a void of pure static, and then a voice I knew intimately, a voice I heard every day, a voice that was now thick with static and a profound, bottomless sadness, a voice that said, "Hey, it's me, it's Leo. I'm so sorry. I didn't see the ice, the car just spun out." And I gasped, my eyes snapping to the couch where Leo still lay, sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. And the voice on the phone, Leo's voice, but not his voice, choked back a sob and said, "Please tell my mom I love her. And tell me, the one sleeping there, tell him not to answer his phone when it rings tomorrow night, promise me." And the line went dead with a final, soft click, and the payphone on my nightstand dissolved into shadow, vanishing as if it had never been there, the cold in the room receding instantly. And I sat there in the dark, staring at the sleeping form of my best friend, alive and breathing, listening to the sound of a future that had already been written. And now I'm sitting here, watching the clock, waiting for the day to pass, waiting for 3 a.m. to come again, and I don't know what to do. Because how do you warn someone about a call that hasn't happened yet, a call that you already know is coming from a place where they already are? And the worst part, the most chilling, gut-wrenching part that keeps playing over and over in my mind is the last thing I heard on that line. Just before it went dead, beneath Leo's voice and the static, the faint, unmistakable sound of my own voice, screaming in the background, begging someone, anyone, not to pick up the phone. The echo of my own future scream, a horrifying premonition trapped in the static of that impossible line, is now a constant noise in my head, a tinnitus of pure dread that drowns out the mundane sounds of the world. And I've been sitting here for hours, watching Leo sleep, his face peaceful and innocent in the early morning light that now streams through the window, completely unaware of the death sentence that has been whispered into my ear, a sentence that carries his name and the specific, brutal poetry of black ice. And the weight of this knowledge is a physical thing, a boulder crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. And every time I look at him, all I can see is the grief on Mark's face from a year ago. And I know I will see it on my own face soon, because the voice said tomorrow night, which means tonight, at 3 a.m., the phone will ring for Leo, and I have to stop it, I have to change it. But how do you fight a future that's already called you to warn you about itself? A paradox that makes my head spin and my stomach churn. And when Leo finally stirs, yawning and stretching on the couch, he smiles at me and says, "Dude, you look like hell, your stomach's still messed up?" And I just stare at him, my mouth dry, my tongue feeling too thick to form words. Because how do I tell him? How do I explain that I got a call from beyond the grave last night? A call that featured his voice and my screams, and that he's gonna die tonight if he answers his phone. So I just mutter something about a bad night's sleep and stumble to the bathroom to splash water on my face, avoiding my own haunted eyes in the mirror. And the day passes in a terrifying blur, a countdown in slow motion, every tick of the clock a hammer blow against my sanity. And I try to formulate a plan, a way to keep him safe, to keep him from answering any phone. So I suggest we go out, a movie marathon, anything to keep us away from the dorm, away from any phones. But he says he's broke and has a huge paper to write, and my desperation mounts, a frantic, buzzing energy under my skin. So I resort to childish, insane tactics. I accidentally spill a glass of water on his smartphone, hoping to short-circuit it. But he just sighs, dries it off with a towel, and says it seems fine, and I consider smashing it outright, creating a scene. But he'd just get angry, maybe leave to go to the library where I can't watch him. And that would be worse, so I'm trapped, a prisoner in my own dorm, forced to watch the hours slip away. And I can't tell Chloe or Mark, because they've spent the last year trying to forget, to move on, and calling them to say the nightmare is back and it's coming for Leo tonight would shatter them completely. So I bear this alone, this terrible, isolating secret. And as evening falls, the atmosphere in the room grows thick with intention I'm certain only I can feel. Leo is oblivious, typing away at his paper, occasionally complaining about the professor, while I sit paralyzed in my desk chair, watching the digital numbers on my clock change, each minute a step closer to the abyss. And when it gets to 11 p.m., I can't take it anymore. I blurt out, "Leo, don't answer your phone tonight, no matter what, okay? Just promise me." And he looks up from his laptop, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What? Why? You expecting a prank call or something?" And I can't explain. The words won't come. They sound insane even in my own head. So I just say, "Just promise me, please, it's important." And he shrugs. "Yeah, okay, whatever you say, man," and goes back to typing. And his easy dismissal is somehow more terrifying than if he'd argued, because it means he hasn't truly heard me, he won't remember, and the night deepens. And he finishes his paper and gets ready for bed, and I pretend to sleep, lying rigid in my bed, my eyes glued to the red numbers of the clock, watching them relentlessly march forward. 2:30, 2:45, 2:55, and the cold begins to seep into the room again, a familiar, hateful presence that frosts the air and makes my teeth chatter. And Leo, in his bed, mutters in his sleep and pulls his comforter up to his chin. And at 2:59 his phone, the one I spilled water on, the one that was supposedly fine, begins to glow on his nightstand, the screen illuminating with an unknown number. And it starts to ring, not its normal melodic tone, but the harsh, metallic, rotary ring of the payphone. A sound that doesn't belong coming from a sleek piece of modern technology. A sound that is wrong on a fundamental level. And Leo stirs, groaning, his hand fumbling sleepily towards the screaming device. And I sit bolt upright in bed, my voice a strangled scream. "Elio, no. Don't answer it. You promised." But it's too late. His eyes are half open, clouded with sleep, and his thumb, acting on months of ingrained habit, swipes across the screen, and he puts the phone to his ear, mumbling, "Hello? Who is this?" And I watch, helpless, as the same transformation I saw in Mark a year ago happens to my best friend, the color draining from his face, his eyes widening in shock, and then in unimaginable horror. And he listens, his mouth agape, tears welling in his eyes, and he whispers, No, that's not. I'm right here. I'm in my room." And he looks over at me, his eyes meeting mine, and they are filled with a terror so profound it seems to swallow him whole. And he says into the phone, his voice breaking, "I'm already dead?" And the line goes dead, and the phone clatters from his hand onto the floor. And he sits there in his bed, trembling, staring at nothing, and I rush to his side, shaking him. Leo, talk to me. What did it say? What did they say?" And he turns to look at me, and his face is a mask of utter despair, and he says, in a voice that is hollow and empty, "It was my own voice, it was me. I was calling from the crash site. I was describing the tree my car wrapped around, the taste of blood in my mouth, the sound of the sirens getting closer. It said to tell you that you were right, that I shouldn't have answered, and that it's already done." And we sit there in the freezing room, holding onto each other as the first rays of dawn creep through the window. And the day passes in a numb, silent haze, both of us too terrified to move, to speak, to even think. Prisoners of a future that has already happened. Waiting for the clock to run out, because the call said it would happen tonight. But the light is here, and he is still here, and a tiny, desperate sliver of hope begins to worm its way into my heart. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe we changed it by knowing. Maybe the future isn't fixed. And by the time evening comes, Leo is almost himself again, trying to laugh it off, calling it a shared hallucination, a night terror, anything to claw back some sense of normalcy. And he says he's starving that. He's going to drive to the all-night diner off campus to get us some cheeseburgers, and my blood runs cold, and I beg him not to go. I tell him to order delivery. But he insists, saying he needs to get out, to clear his head, to feel like he's doing something normal. And he grabs his car keys and heads for the door, and I am right behind him, pleading with him, but he just smiles a weak, tired smile and says, "I'll be back in 20 minutes, I promise. No phones will ring in the car." And he walks out, and I stand in the doorway, watching him go, a feeling of utter doom settling over me. And I wait, each second in agony, and 5 minutes later, my own phone rings, and the caller ID shows Leo's name, and I answer it with a trembling hand. And it's not Leo, it's a stranger's voice, frantic and scared, saying there's been an accident, that a car hit black ice and spun into a tree, that they found this phone at the scene and hit redial, and would I please come quickly, and I collapse to my knees, the phone falling from my hand, because I finally understand the full, cruel horror of it all. The call last night wasn't a warning we could change. It was a notification, a receipt from the universe for a death that had already been purchased, an echo from a moment that was always going to happen. And the voices on the payphone don't just belong to the dead, they are the dead, and they're calling to make sure their stories are heard, too. Tie up the loose ends, and they will find you, no matter where you are, no matter what you do, and they will make you listen. And now I am alone, truly alone, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to my soul, that the call will come for me one day, at 3 a.m., and it will be my own voice on the other end of the line, and I will have to answer it. The silence in the dorm room after they called back to formally tell me, after the police came and I gave a hollow, shell-shocked statement that omitted the impossible phone call, was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating entity that filled the space where Leo's laughter used to be. And for weeks I moved through the world like a ghost myself, attending classes on autopilot, staring at pages of text that held no meaning, jumping at every ringtone, every chime, every vibration that cut through the air, because the terror had not left with him. It had burrowed deep inside me, a parasite of dread that fed on the ticking of clocks and the slow, inevitable march of time towards the next 3 a.m. And I avoided Chloe and Mark, their faces mirrors of a grief I shared but could never fully explain. Because how could I tell them that I'd heard his death before it happened, that I'd listened to the ghost of our friend narrate his own end? So I isolated myself, a prisoner in my own skull. And the first month anniversary of his death arrived with the subtlety of a heart attack, the dread building for days beforehand, a crescendo of anxiety that peaked as the digital display on my nightstand clicked over to 2:59 a.m., and the air in my single room, I'd moved out of our shared dorm the week after the funeral, grew instantly, piercingly cold, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying, begging for it to pass. But then it rang, not from my cell phone, not from some phantom payphone, materializing in the corner, but from within the walls themselves, a vibration that shook the plaster and the cheap framed poster of a mountain landscape, a ringing that was inside the very structure of the building, and I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound was in my bones, in my teeth, and it was his ring, the old rotary shriek, and it rang and rang and rang for the entire minute, a torturous 60 seconds that felt like an eternity in hell. And when it stopped, I was weeping, curled into a ball on my floor, and I knew then that this was my punishment, my eternal reminder, that every month, on the anniversary of that first horrific call in my old room, I would be forced to listen, to remember my failure, to hear the instrument of his death and know I could do nothing, and the months bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of dread and recovery, each 3 a.m. visitation leaving me more hollowed out than the last. And I started to research, desperately, obsessively, scouring the internet for any similar stories, any folklore about phones and the dead. And I found fragments, whispers of phantom callers and death omens, but nothing as precise, as malicious as this. And I even drove back to the old payphone once, in the blinding light of midday, but it was gone. The entire booth had been ripped out, leaving only a stained concrete pad and a few severed wires that curled from the ground like dead worms. And the hopelessness of that discovery was absolute, because there was no source to plead with, no object to destroy. The curse wasn't tied to a place, it was tied to me. It had chosen me as its witness, its monthly audience of one. and I began to change, my life narrowing to the space between these terrible appointments. I dropped out of college, I stopped seeing friends, I moved into a sparse, quiet apartment where the only clock was a battery-operated analog on the wall. Its silent, sweeping hand a gentle mockery of the digital countdowns that had haunted me. And I took a night job stocking shelves at a grocery store, a mindless, solitary task that kept me occupied during the witching hours. But no matter where I was at 3 a.m., in the stark, fluorescent-lit aisles surrounded by boxes of cereal, in my car parked by the river, walking the empty streets, the cold would find me, and the ringing would come, sometimes a faint echo as if from a block away, sometimes a deafening peal that seemed to originate from inside my own head, and I would simply stop and stand and endure it, a monthly seizure of the soul. And people noticed, of course they did, my gaunt appearance, my flinch at sudden noises, the way I'd check my watch with a panicked look every night as 3 a.m. approached, and they wrote me off as a junkie or a mental case, which was fine by me because the truth was so much worse. And then last night something different happened. It was the 2-year anniversary of that first dare, the night Mark answered the phone and heard his mother, and the cold that swept into my apartment was colder than ever before, a deep space cold that made the windows crackle. And the ringing, when it came, was different too. It wasn't just one phone, it was a symphony of them, a cacophony of overlapping rings from every era. The sharp bell of a rotary, the digital chirp of a 90s cell phone, the generic marimba of a modern smartphone, all blending into one horrific chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, from inside my refrigerator and my television. And I fell to my knees, my hands pressed to my ears, screaming for it to stop. And in the brief silences between the rings, I heard them, whispers layered over each other, a crowd of voices from the void, and I recognized Mark's mother's gentle apology. I recognized Leo's terrified description of the tree and the taste of blood. But there were more, so many more, voices I didn't know, men, women, children, all whispering fragments of their final moments. A car crash, a fall, a sudden illness, a quiet passing in sleep. A library of deaths all being broadcast directly into my mind. And I understood then the true, monstrous scale of it. The payphone was just a doorway, a single point of access. And I had been chosen not just to witness Leo's death, but to become a receiver, a living antenna tuned to the frequency of the dead. And they were all trying to call home, to leave one last message, and I was the only one who could hear them. And as the ringing finally faded and the cold receded, leaving me shivering and broken on the floor, I knew with a chilling certainty that this would not be the end, that the calls would keep coming, growing longer, louder, more numerous, until my sanity finally shattered under the weight of all those voices, all those final words. And that one day at my own 3 a.m., my voice would just be one more among the countless others, added to the chorus, forever ringing in the ears of some poor soul cursed to listen. The aftermath of that cacophony left me a different kind of broken, a hollowed-out vessel whose only purpose was to await the next transmission, the next monthly assault of sound and sorrow. And my life shrank to the barest of essentials, a grayscale existence where the only color was the blinding, terror-induced white of 3 a.m. And I quit the grocery store job because being around people, seeing the easy, uncomplicated way they inhabited their lives, was a special kind of torture, a reminder of a world I was permanently exiled from. And I lived off savings that were dwindling faster than my will to live, in an apartment that was little more than a soundproofed cell. I'd tacked moving blankets over the walls and stuffed towels under the doors, a pathetic attempt to muffle the unmuffable, to build a fortress against the enemy that resided in the very air. And my days were spent in a numb haze, watching the slow arc of the sun across the floor, counting the hours, the minutes, until the next siege. And the calls did change. They grew longer, the single minute stretching to 2, then 3, the voices and the static between rings becoming clearer, more distinct, more desperate to be understood. And I stopped fighting it. I stopped clamping my hands over my ears and screaming, because the effort was futile and exhausting. And instead I just sat on my bare floor, knees drawn to my chest. And I listened, I let the waves of other people's final moments wash over me, a tsunami of terminal fear and last-second regrets. And I became an archivist of the dead, my mind a morbid library filled with stories that ended at the very moment they were being told to me. The woman who whispered a recipe for her famous peanut butter cookies to her daughter, who would never get to make them. The little boy crying that he was lost and couldn't find his mommy in the big, smoky room. The old man calmly giving the combination to a safe that held letters for his estranged son. And with each voice, a piece of their ending lodged itself in me. A psychic shrapnel that I could never dig out, and the weight of it was crushing. A gravity of grief that pressed me down into the floor, and I started to recognize the signs of an impending call beyond just the cold, a certain pressure in the air, a metallic taste on my tongue, a faint phantom smell of ozone and decay that would precede the ringing by hours, and my body became an early warning system for my own torment. And I knew I couldn't go on like this, that I was eroding, my mind fraying at the edges like an old photograph. So I did the only thing I could think of, the thing I should have done years ago. I reached out to the only other. People who might understand, who had been there at the beginning, and I called Mark, and his voice on the line, older, weary, but still his, was a shock to my system, a touchstone to a reality I had almost forgotten, and I told him everything, the words pouring out of me in a frantic, jumbled rush, the monthly calls, Leo's voice predicting his own death, the symphony of the dead that now visited me, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end, so long I thought the connection had dropped, and then he said, his voice quiet and thick with emotion, "I get them too, man." And my blood went cold, not from a supernatural chill, but from a human one, a shared horror. And he explained that his calls were different. They only came on the anniversary of his mother's death. And it was always her, always the same message, the same apology, the same love. And he said it was a torture, but also a perverse comfort, a chance to hear her voice one more time. And he told me Chloe had moved across the country, changed her number, tried to outrun it. But she emailed him once, a year ago, a frantic, paranoid message saying a payphone had started ringing outside her new apartment every night at 3 a.m. And she was losing her mind. And we realized then that it hadn't let any of us go. It had just tailored the horror to each of us, a unique punishment for our original sin of answering. And we agreed to meet, to try and face this thing together, one last time, and driving to meet him. The first time I'd been in a car since Leo's death was a feat of sheer will. Every shadow on the road looked like black ice, every sound like the beginning of a ring. But I made it, and seeing Mark, older, grayer at 21 than anyone should be, was like looking into a mirror of my own suffering. And we went to a diner, the kind that was always open, and over bad coffee we talked for hours, comparing notes, trying to find a pattern, a loophole, a way to break the connection, and it was there in the warm, greasy light of the diner that the idea came to me, a desperate, insane idea born from a year of listening to the dead. I turned to him and said, "What if we answer on purpose?" And he stared at me like I'd lost my mind, which I suppose I had, and I explained, my words tumbling over each other. We've been treating it like a curse, a punishment, something to be endured. But what if it's not? What if it's a service? A switchboard? They're trying to get a message through, and we're the only line out. So maybe we stop just listening, maybe we start talking back, maybe we ask questions. And the look of horror on Mark's face was absolute. No. No way. You don't know what you're messing with. We answered once, and it ruined our lives. You want to answer again? On purpose. But the idea had taken root in my fractured mind. It was the only thing that felt like action instead of reaction. The only spark of agency I'd felt in 2 years. And I begged him. I told him I couldn't do it alone, that I needed him there, and reluctantly, fearfully, he agreed, because what else did we have to lose? And so now, here we are, back in my barren, sound-dampened apartment, the moving blankets on the walls making it feel like a tomb, a coffin for the living, and the clock on the wall ticks towards 3 a.m., and the air is already growing cold. The metallic taste is sharp on my tongue, and Mark is pale, sweating, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees, and I am sitting cross-legged on the floor facing him. A digital recorder, a stupid, hopeful, human device, placed on the floor. between us, and I am waiting, not with passive dread, but with a terrifying active anticipation. Because tonight, when the ringing starts, when the chorus of the dead begins its nightly broadcast into my skull, I am not going to just listen. I am going to pick up, and I am going to say hello. The silence in the room is no longer just an absence of sound, but a held breath, a vacuum waiting to be filled with a terror so profound it has its own taste and weight. And Mark's eyes are wide, locked on mine, reflecting the same bottomless fear I feel churning in my gut. But beneath it, a flicker of something else, a desperate, wild hope that this insane plan might somehow work, that by engaging the horror instead of just enduring it, we might finally break its hold on us, and the cold intensifies, a deep, marrow-freezing chill that has nothing to do with the apartment's thermostat, and the familiar pressure builds in my sinuses, the air thickening until it feels like we're submerged in ice water. And the first ring is not a sound that enters through my ears, but one that manifests directly inside my consciousness, a violent metallic clangor that vibrates through every bone. And it's the symphony again, the overlapping tones of 100 different phones from 100 different eras, all ringing in perfect, horrific unison. And I see Mark flinch, his hands flying to his head, and I know he hears it too. The barrier between us has been shattered. The private hells we've each been living in are now a shared space of agony. And the whispers start, the layered, frantic cacophony of final thoughts and last words, a jumble of panic and love and regret that threatens to overwhelm my sanity before I can even begin. And I force myself to focus, to push past the wall of noise, to find a single thread in the tapestry of despair. And I zero in on a voice, a young woman's voice, clear and sharp with fear, repeating, "He's in the house, he's in the house, the closet door is opening." And I take a shuddering breath, my voice a ragged, broken thing in the frozen air, and I speak, not to the room, but into the noise, into the static between the rings. "We hear you. Who is in the house?" And the effect is instantaneous and catastrophic. The ringing ceases abruptly. The whispers cut off as if a master switch has been thrown. And the silence that follows is somehow more terrifying than the noise, a void of pure anticipation. And then a single voice, the young woman's voice, now clear and shockingly close, as if she's standing right next to me, screams, "He is!" And the force of it is physical, a blast of psychic wind that knocks me backwards, and the room erupts, not in sound, but in image, in sensation. The moving blankets on the walls are gone, replaced by faded floral wallpaper. A dresser appears, a messy bed, a closet door swinging slowly open to reveal a depth of shadow that is absolute and hungry. And I can smell stale perfume and dust and the coppery tang of blood. And I am no longer in my apartment. I am there, in her final moment, a ghost in her memory. And I feel her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. I feel the cold floorboards under her bare feet. I see the shape emerging from the darkness of the closet, tall and indistinct and radiating a malice so pure it feels like acid on my skin. And I am paralyzed, a spectator to a murder that has already happened, and her scream is inside my head, tearing through my mind, and I want to shut it out, to retreat. But I remember the plan, and with a Herculean effort, I push a thought towards her, a message in a bottle thrown into a storm. "Your name. Tell me your name." And the vision wavers, the intensity breaking for a fraction of a second, and her voice, choked with sobs, replies, "Lydia, my name is Lydia Moss. 17 Oak Lane, please." And the name and address etch themselves into my brain with the permanence of a brand. And then the shape is upon her, and the connection is severed with a finality that is jarring. The floral wallpaper, the bed, the closet, all vanishing, snapping back to the stark reality of my blank-walled apartment. And I am on my back on the floor, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. And Mark is staring at me, his face a mask of utter horror, and he whispers, "What did you do?" "Your nose, it's bleeding." And I touch my upper lip, my fingers coming away wet and red, and the digital recorder between us is smoking slightly, a tiny wisp of gray rising from its plastic casing, its screen dark and dead. And the cold in the room is receding, the pressure lifting, and the ringing does not return. The 3 a.m. hour passes in a silence that is, for the first time in years, completely and utterly normal. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, the ragged sound of our own breathing, and we sit there for a long time, not speaking, trying to process what just happened, the violation of it, the intimacy of witnessing a stranger's death, and the crushing weight of the knowledge she imparted. A name and an address that now feels like a sacred, terrible burden. And as the sun begins to rise, painting the room in weak, gray light, Mark finally speaks, his voice hoarse. We have to find out if she was real, and I know he's right, the compulsion is undeniable. We have been given a message from beyond the grave, and to ignore it feels like a greater sin than answering the phone ever was. So we spend the day in a strange, dreamlike state, fueled by adrenaline and dread, searching online for any record of a Lydia Moss. And after hours of dead ends, we find it, a brief, chilling news article from 3 years ago. Local woman Lydia Moss found deceased in home. Police investigate foul play. And the address listed is 17 Oak Lane, and the article says the case remains unsolved. No suspects, no leads, just a family's unanswered questions and a life brutally ended. And we look at each other, and the reality of what we've done, what we've tapped into, settles over us, a mantle of responsibility that is both terrifying and electrifying. Because we have done the impossible. We have not just received a call, we have answered back, and we have gotten a reply. And we now hold a piece of a puzzle that the police, that our family, that the entire world of the living does not have. And the implications are staggering. The potential for good is immense. But so is the danger. For we have no idea what we are truly meddling with, what the cost of being an operator for the dead might be. And as night falls again, I know with a certainty that chills me more than any supernatural cold ever could, that this is not the end, that the line is now open. And the next call could be for anyone about anything, and it will be our job, our curse, our purpose, to answer it, and to listen and to act. And the payphone is no longer out in the woods or in our dorm rooms. It is inside us, and it will never, ever stop ringing. The knowledge of Lydia Moss is a live wire in my brain, sparking and sizzling with a terrible energy that makes sleep impossible. Her final moments replaying on a loop behind my eyes. The floral wallpaper, the looming shadow, the sheer, petrifying certainty of her end. And it's no longer just about surviving the monthly calls. It's about this new, horrifying responsibility we've stumbled into. A responsibility that feels both sacred and damning. And Mark is just as wrecked as I am. His hands shaking so badly he can't light his cigarette. His eyes hollow from the shared vision of a murder we witnessed but didn't see. And we know we have to do something. We can't just sit on this. We can't let our message die with us in this soundproofed room. So we decide on an anonymous tip, a carefully crafted email from a burner account sent to the detective listed in the old article, mentioning specific, non-public details about the closet door, the layout of the room, details only the killer or a witness would know. And we send it off into the digital void, a message in a bottle tossed into a sea of officialdom. And we wait, expecting nothing, hoping for everything, and for a week, nothing happens. The silence is its own kind of agony. And the approach of the next 3 a.m. is a looming specter, because we have no idea what to expect now, having broken the unspoken rules of this terrible game. Will the call even come? Will it be louder? Will there be repercussions for our interference? The dread is a physical sickness in my stomach, and when the night arrives, the cold comes as it always does, a deep, invasive chill that seems to originate from within my own bones, and the pressure builds, a familiar headache forming behind my eyes, and at precisely 3 o'clock, the ringing begins. But it's different this time. It's not a symphony, it's a single, persistent ring, the old, rotary ring of the original payphone, clear and sharp and focused, and it's not in my head, it's emanating from the dead digital recorder on the floor between us, the little black device now glowing with a faint, internal light, its shattered screen flickering, and Mark and I look at each other, a silent communication of pure terror, and I know what I have to do. I lean forward, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, and I press the imaginary answer button on the dead machine, and I say, my voice barely a whisper, hello. And the voice that answers is not a stranger's, it's a voice I have. Heard 100 times in my monthly torments, the calm, measured voice of the old man giving the safe combination. And he says, clear as day, no static, no echo. Thank you for the message. It has been received. The balance has been noted. And the line goes dead, and the recorder's light winks out. And the room is just a room again, and Mark and I are left staring at each other in bewildered silence. Because what does that mean? The balance has been noted. Is it a good thing? A warning? A transaction? The uncertainty is a new kind of torture. And the next day, Mark calls me, his voice frantic, telling me to turn on the local news. And there it is, a breaking story. The arrest of a man in the decades-old cold case of Lydia Moss. New evidence miraculously coming to light. A forgotten witness coming forward. And the detective is on screen, looking stunned but satisfied, and we know with a certainty that turns our blood to ice, that we did that. Our message was received and the balance was noted, and the feeling is not one of triumph, but of profound, earth-shattering vertigo, because we are no longer just victims of a curse. We are active participants in a system we cannot comprehend, operators on a switchboard that connects the living and the dead, and the weight of that power, and the fear of the debt we may now owe, is heavier than any fear I have ever known. And that night, the call comes again at 3 a.m., from the television this time, which turns itself onto a screen of boiling static, and the ringing is there, embedded in the white noise, and I answer again. And this time it's the little boy who was lost in the smoky room, his voice small and scared, and he gives me an address, a different town, a different state, a fire from 5 years ago, and I write it down with a trembling hand. And I know that this is it. This is my life now. The calls will keep coming, each one a thread from a life cut short, a puzzle piece from a story that needs an ending, and I will have to find a way to pass these messages on, to maintain this terrible, fragile balance, to be the voice for those who no longer have one, all while waiting for the day when the call that comes through is in my own voice. And I have to hope that when that day comes, there will be someone on the other end, someone brave enough or foolish enough to pick up and to listen.